So we are live now. Sudipto, I think you should start as we are live now.
Okay. Hello, Shakuntala. Can you hear me? Hello.
No, we can't hear him, but he has put us on live. So
should I proceed?
I think so. Yeah, you proceed.
Welcome all. It's a pleasure for us, Department of English, AMDANGA JUGAL KISHORE MAHAVIDYALAYA, to organize such a webinar on a very topical issue. I have with us today distinguished Vice Chancellor of Bankura University, Professor Devnaran Bandyopadhyay. We have HOD, West Bengal State University, Department of English, Professor Chandrabo Chakraborty, and our IQAC coordinator of AMDANGA JUGAL KISHORE MAHAVIDYALAYA, Professor Chirantan Dasgupta with us today. I would like to request Professor Chandrabo Chakraborty to introduce Professor Devnaran Bandyopadhyay and thereby start our session.
Thank you, Sudipto and Shamim, for taking me on board. It gives me immense pleasure to introduce Professor Devnaran Bandyopadhyay and our very own Devnaran Da, who has been my teacher at Calcutta University. Professor Devnaran Bandyopadhyay is the Honorable Vice Chancellor of Bankura University, West Bengal. He was professor in the Department of English, Bardwan University, India. He is also the Secretary of the Indian Association for the Study of Australia Eastern Region and Indian Association of Scottish Studies. In 2001, he was invited to give a course of lectures on 19th century representations of Shakespeare in India at the University of Vienna, Shakespeare Society of Vienna, and the University of Salzburg. He also visited the University of Edinburgh and lectured at a seminar organized at Mansfield College, Oxford in 2002. He was nominated for the Fulbright Exchange. In 2003, he worked at Northern Illinois University, at the University of Chicago, and the State University of New York. He was awarded fellowships by the Australia-India Council in 2005 and 6, and was a distinguished visiting scholar at Monash University in 2007. He was a visiting research fellow at the University of New South Wales in 2010-12, and the honorary adjunct senior research fellow at Monash University. He has published and co-edited many scholarly books and is the author of innumerable papers. He is also the international contributing editor of the Journal of American History. He was the project leader of a research project on gerontology, working in collaboration with the University of Swansea, Wales, which has been funded by UKAC. Thank you. I think, may I request now Professor Devnaran Bandyopadhyay to deliver his keynote address.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me properly? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes. First of all, I must thank the organizers, especially Shamim, who contacted me, and other staff members of AMDANGA JUGAL KISHORE MAHAVIDYALAYA, and Professor Chandrabo Chakraborty, especially for our very kind words. Thank you very much for inviting me to say something about the reading of literature during the time of the pandemic. I was not really sure what I will really talk about, but then I thought that I must talk about King Oedipus, an ancient text which was written and performed in 5th century BC. So I thought that this is the most suitable kind of literary text that we can go back to, and especially in the context of the pandemic. So I decided that I would talk about a particular facet, not the entire. And in this regard, I have specifically consulted the text of R.C. Jabe's translation of King Oedipus, because I don't really like the Penguin edition translation, because that brings down the tragic grandeur which is embedded in the text. And I would therefore talk about a particular theme, and the theme is pharmakoi. What is a pharmakos, or what is a pharmakoi? These are questions which have been again and again raised in the play. We normally try to interpret Sophocles' King Oedipus in the context of what Aristotle has written about it in his Poetics. We try to interpret the dramatic structure, the irony, the cards, the destiny, etc. These are some of the salient features that we are really concerned about when we try to talk about King Oedipus. But sometimes some critics have to some extent concentrated on this particular problem. I remember Professor Jane Harrison's very important book, Prolegomena to Greek Religion. Very interesting book where he tries to make a study of different aspects of cultural practice in terms of ritualistic activity. This is very, very interesting. Interesting in the sense that it tries to revisit the ancient cultural practice. Now, I will, because time is very short, I have also another meeting, that is the EC meeting of the university. So I will just come straight to the text. First of all, the originary myth. What is the story that Aeschylus before him and then Sophocles tries to recapture in the plays? We all know that Aeschylus wrote 3 plays. The first play was called Laius. The second play was Oedipus. And the third play was 7 against the Thebes. 7 against Thebes. Now, when we talk about the first play, Laius, we find that we only come across some words from that play. Otherwise, the play is lost. But there are some references to it in other writings. So from that, we gathered some ideas about that. And then Oedipus. From this play, we have only some verses. Otherwise, the play is lost. Again, we find some references in 7 against Thebes. In 7 against Thebes, we find that Aeschylus has altered the originary myth, where we find that Oedipus is unaware of the fact that he is killing his own father and marrying his own mother. And when it is found out, then it is considered to be a sacrilege, a sin, a pollution, and as a result of that, the expulsion from the city. This is very briefly re-described in his play 7 Against Thebes. So we get to know about the standpoint of his plays, that he departs from the original. Where does he depart? I will talk about that in a moment. And Sophocles follows his case. Now, what is the original? Now, King Oedipus' myth has been there in Homer's Iliad twice, in book 4 and again in book 23, and again in Odyssey, book 11. Now, in book 4, Homer shows that a warrior is describing the grand funeral celebration, funeral games, actually. The grand funeral games organized on the occasion of the death of Oedipus. That's what we find there. But nothing is there to concentrate on pollution, expulsion, etc. There is no such question. Again, in book 24, we find that he reigned for a long time. It is true that there was certain things like this happening. He married his own mother, killed his own father, etc. But he didn't mind. He continued for 18 years after that and died in a warfare, died by violence, as Homer says. Homer says that he died of violence. And then again, Odyssey, book 11. Here we find that in book 11, Odysseus visits the underworld. And when he visits the underworld, he meets Epicus. This also is very, very, problematic. Because we know that Oedipus' mother come wife is Leocasta in Sophocles, in Aeschylus, but in Homer, she is Epicaste. This, I'm not going into the details because that will take much time, because Epicaste, Iocasta, so those should be linguistically considered, but I'm not going into that. However, so we find that Odysseus in book 11 goes to the underworld and meets Epicaste. And there we find a detailed description of the scene, and the scene was made known to the gods and to human beings. But I'm quoting from Homer's Odyssey, Oedipus continued to rule at Thebes, though his wife, mother Epicaste, committed suicide. And this is the kind of myth that continued in another source, that is Oedipedia. Oedipedia means, it refers to the Theban cycle of myths. Theban cycle of myths. There also we find the same kind of version, but it comes to be changed when it comes to Sophocles. So naturally, Sophocles was trying to mimetically represent what Aeschylus has already done. That means considering the idea of sin and pollution as one of the central problematics in the play. And he largely departs from the Homeric tradition and even the Hesiodic tradition. Hesiod also refers to the original myth of King Oedipus. So he moves away, removes all of these, and tries to recreate a new kind of story. And therefore, it brings to my mind that Sophocles, perhaps, was trying to reinterpret the story. Now, in Aeschylus, when you read Aeschylus, as far as we can gather from Oedipus Seven in his themes, we find that Aeschylus' major intention was to establish the heroic cult, the hero cult, Oedipus as the hero, and the family tradition of it goes. Now, this actually was there, and also we should consider the myth. This also is very, very important. The myth. Yes. When we think about the myth, we have to know about the entire family, because we again and again say that there is a curse in the family. There is a curse in the family. What is that curse? How does it work? So we have, in order to get an idea about that, we have to know the myth. How the curse is working in the family, as in the case of Aeschylus' Odyssey and trilogy. There's a curse in the family which works and comes to be purified in the last part of Aeschylus' play, which is called Humanides, the kindly ones. The last play shows the purification of all sins. So therefore, Sophocles is trying to take over that myth, that idea of the curse, and the purification. Let me, so therefore very briefly, because I don't have much time, very briefly talk about the myth. I don't know, I believe that there are students also in this webinar. And for the students,
most probably this sir got disconnected somehow.
Am I disconnected?
Now, sir, you are audible and visible. So please continue, sir.
Okay. So therefore, let me talk about that. For the students, I must say that they must consult Robert Graves's Greek myths. In our student days, it was in 2 volumes, but now it is available in 1 volume. However, the original myth refers to a place in Central Asia where the king is actually Phoenicia. He was a Phoenician king. Nowadays, Phoenicia is somewhere in Lebanon, around Lebanon. Now, the king was Aegenor. Aegenor. Aegenor was the king, and he had 3 sons and a daughter. And the daughter was called Europa. Now, suddenly, Europa was lost. And then Aegenor sent all his sons to find out Europa. Where has she gone? Where has she settled herself? You can find that it's all very symbolic. Europa actually refers to the settlement of Europe. But Europa could not be found anywhere. One of his sons was Cadmus. That's why in the play Sophocles' King Oedipus, you will again and again see the Cadmeians or the house of Cadmus, etc. These are some of the phrases that you will come across in the play, because it's from the house of Cadmus. Now, Cadmus, in search of Europa, ultimately came to the city of Delphi. Those 3 roads, the crossroads, where ultimately Laius will be killed. he came to that crossroads, and then he was instructed to establish a city in Sphinx from there. And then he came to Sphinx, and there he found a dragon, killed the dragon, and was cursed. However, the curse was lifted, and then he married an indigenous queen. Her name was Harmonia. So it is in this way that we find an assemblage of different kinds of cultures, and Cadmus and Harmonia gave birth to, among many others, a daughter called Semele. Semele became the illicit wife of the king of gods, Zeus, and they had a son called Dionysus. Semele ultimately committed suicide in different circumstances. That's deep. I'll not talk about that because you can read it in the Greek myths. So Dionysus was a suffering god. So nobody will find happiness in this family. And there was the original cause of the dragon. And after that, we find that Dionysus became a suffering god and he became a wandering god. In Oedipus' play Phoenicians, there is a reference that he even came to India on his religious journey, and later on he was accepted as the god of vegetation, and much later as a god of wine, and became the god of tragedies. However, Labdacus was the son, another son of Cadmus. Labdacus gave birth to Laius, father of Oedipus. Laius went to the kingdom of Elis, ruled by the Pelops, and there he suddenly got attracted by a young boy called Chrysippus and raped him physically, and this was considered to be a grievous sin, and as a result of that, Pelops, the father of Chrysippus, said, "You have vitiated my son, so therefore you will never be able to give birth to a son, and even if you give birth to a son, then he will kill you." That was a curse. And he came back. And he thought that this curse means nothing. But it is here that the story actually begins to roll on. And Oedipus' story actually, as we find in Sophocles, starts from here. So therefore, now we can see that there is a curse in the family. It is the scene of Laius. And as a result of that, he gave birth to a son who is destined to kill him. And that happens ultimately. He gave birth to a son, and that was Oedipus, and he wanted to kill the little child. He was barely 1 day or 2 days old, and therefore he nailed him on his toes, and he sent him with a shepherd to the top of Mount Kithiran, believing that he will die of excessive outflow of blood. But that did not happen. However, Oedipus, this name also comes from that. His toes ultimately got cured, but it was swollen. So that's why Oedi, swollen, paus means foot, the swollen foot. So, however, now Sophocles is trying to perhaps look at the plague, the curse, and the healer. Who will heal? The person who will heal will himself become a victim, become a sacrifice. Otherwise, he cannot heal. And you must know that Sophocles' King Oedipus was actually performed, although it is very much debated, but it was performed in 426 BC. Some say 430 BC. However, it is around this time, just 4 years before this, plague started in Athens. And you know that this 5th century outbreak of plague in Athens killed more than 1 lakh people in Athens alone. So, however, it was a terrible disaster. The plague started in Athens. And it is in this situation that Sophocles was writing the play. And naturally, he brings about the idea of plague in his play. Let me read out some lines. Let me read out some lines. A blight is on our harvest in the fields, a blight upon the grazing flocks and herds, a blight on women in labor, and all around, armed with his blazing torch, the god of plague has swooped down upon us, emptying the city of Cadmus, and the murky realm of heads is made full with groans and tears. So you can see there is famine, the harvest is lost, the women have lost their children, they cannot give birth to children, and there is the plague which destroys the city of Cadmus. So in a very touching manner, Sophocles is describing the plague. And moreover, Sophocles was very much aware of a particular kind of festival that used to happen. And it happened at that time very, very much because of the outbreak of plague. And it was called Thargelia. Thargelia. It was a festival of ritualistic sacrifice in honor of Apollo. It's not the Athenian Apollo, of course, not the Delphic Apollo, but it is the Apollo of a different kind who used to be worshipped in the island of Delos. So he is called Delian Apollo. However, so in honor of Apollo, they used to organize this festival, the Thargelia. It was originally a kind of agricultural festival, but before the beginning of the agricultural things, they would first of all organize a purificatory cult. The sins should be cleansed. It should be properly cleansed. The city should be cleansed. It is katharmos. Katharmos, katharmos, the purification. And whatever pollution is there, in Greek they used to use the word miasma. We also use it in English. Miasma. M-I-A-S-M-A. Miasma means pollution. So there is pollution in the city, and that should be katharmos. There should be a cleansing. And who will cleanse? Not the Aristotelian tragic emotions of pity and fear and catharsis, but the pharmakoi. So if we consider the play ritualistically, then we find that the pandemic has started. All over the city, there is the plague. People are afraid of this. People are dying. So therefore, there should be a cleansing. There should be katharmos, because there is pollution, miasma everywhere. And therefore, we feel the need for a pharmakoi. What was the system in Thargelia? In Thargelia, the priests would select 2 pharmakoi, 2 healers, right? 2 healers, and they are chosen to heal the city through their death or expulsion. And we have an ancient poet of 6th century BC. His name was Hipponax, Hipponax, Hipponax. Hipponax actually gives us a lyrical description of this Thargelia. There he describes this. 2 persons should be killed. One representing a man, one representing the men of the city, and another representing the women of the city. And the 2 people die in King Oedipus. Right. One is Laius and another expulsion, that is King Oedipus. And sacrifice, that is Iocasta. So, as you can see, if we look at the idea of this Thargelia, we find the central figure is Apollo. Now, in Jane Harrison's book, it has been again and again pointed out that there are certain names of gods which are not really Greek. Number 1 is Apollo. Apollo was a name which must have migrated from somewhere else, and maybe it was brought by the Dorians when they invaded Greece in 12th century BC. No, sorry, in 19th century BC, the first invasion. In 19th century BC, when the Dorians actually attacked Greece, they brought with them their own kinds of culture and their own kind of militant culture, of course, and at the same time their gods. And Apollo was perhaps their god, and that's why there was an intermixing of worship in Delphi. Right. So it used to be worshipped by women. So there was a pythoness, but then the image of Apollo was placed there, thereby creating an intermixing and permeation of cultures. However, this Apollo is also a redeemer, one who helps the healing of sin. So therefore, in King Oedipus, we find 3 distinctive stages of Apollo's intervention. Number 1, Apollo's prophecy regarding Laius and consequent naming of Oedipus. So Apollo actually, through Delphi, the oracle tells him that Laius, if he gives birth to a child, will kill him. And therefore, the child should be destroyed. And therefore, the maiming of Oedipus. Therefore, his toes were nailed and he was sent out to be laid open on the top of Mount Kithaeron to die. But that did not happen. So this is the first intervention of Apollo towards avoiding the miasma, the pollution. The second, Apollo's prophecy to Oedipus, again through Delphi, because he has been hearing certain gossips that he will kill his father, marry his mother, etc. Sort of things actually reached him. Therefore, he went to the temple at Delphi, and the temple at Delphi once again made the prophecy that he should avoid Corinth. He should avoid his parents, his father and his mother. But they were actually not his parents. They were Polybus and Merope, the king and the queen. Polybus and Merope simply took care of him because they were childless. But he took certain steps which brought him to the fulfillment of the final act. So therefore, the arrival at Thebes and the solution to the riddle of Sphinx. Now, this riddle of Sphinx he solves, of course, but don't we know that it is actually, again, another step forward to the final act? I'm again and again saying the final act because here I refer to the final act as the act of healing through sacrifice, Oedipus emerging as the pharmakoi, the healer. And finally, Tiresias' statement. He says that he is Thebaios, that means he is of Thebes, which actually creates a confusion. And he actually comes as a messenger of Apollo, Tiresias. Tiresias comes as a messenger of Apollo and says that he is not a Corinthian. He is, in Greek, he says Thebaios. You are a Thebes, a Theban. So he is from Thebes. So therefore, we can see it ultimately comes to be revealed through the arrival of the Corinthian messenger, the right man at the right place at the right time. So this is how we find that Apollo seems to hold a very, very important position. And that's why we find that this festival, this idea of the guilty person, if we read Strabo's geography, now Strabo also refers to the pharmakos, much later of course, but he refers to the idea of the pharmakos, and he says that pharmakos actually is a guilty person. And what is done to a pharmakoi? He should be removed from the city. There should be an expulsion from the city, and he should be made a victim. So therefore, it is in this act, it is through this act that he will cause healing, katharsia, cleansing, and not only katharsia of a particular place, a particular man, but katharsia of the whole place, of the entire people. That's why the Greeks, in their ritualistic practice, used to have a specific word called perikathairo. Peri means around. Perikathairo, cleansing from all sides. Perikathairo. So that's why the entire process of expulsion is called catharsis. It is for this reason that Gilbert Murray rejected Professor Boucher's interpretation. Boucher gives us a medical interpretation that the purgation theory has been, launched by Professor Boucher, but Gilbert Murray long back, both of them actually wrote about this long back. Professor Gilbert Murray actually calls catharsis essentially purificatory. And that's why, what was it really like? We should consider that now. The expulsion, but what kind of expulsion? There is always, an expulsion from the city. There is a Sphinx, there is a danger in the city, and plague has also started, and Laius therefore wants to know about it, and he leaves the city, expulsion from the city, and he is sacrificed. So therefore Laius is the first to play the sacral role. To play the sacral role. He's the first to play, to activate the idea of catharsia through his death, where the three roads meet. The three roads meet, and the sacrifice at that point is a ritualistic practice. So therefore, we find that the expulsion comes later, but before that, the anagnorisis, it is the discovery, because you have to find out the persons for the sacrifice. You have to find out the person for the sacrifice who will act the role of the pharmakoi. So Oedipus is selected. Oedipus is the person who is found to be not only the cause of the plague, but also the pharmakoi. There is the cause of the plague. It is because of him, and therefore he must act out the role of the pharmakoi, the role of the healer, and this is discovered. So it is a ritualistic discovery, a ritualistic anagnorisis, followed by the peripety reversal. It may be located in the pharmakos himself. He suddenly finds himself. We know that he was on the highest position. He's again and again addressed by the chorus as the greatest of all, as the greatest king, the tyrannus, the highest king. Now, he now finds himself as a hated outcast. And therefore now he must play his role. So he must now leave his gaudy royal garments. Representation is a symbolic representation of the enactment of the idea of healing. So therefore, these three unfortunate characters, in fact, we know Oedipus, I'm sorry. Sorry, let me just find out. I would like to just refer to one point and then finish, because I have Yes. So therefore, I will not be able to continue after this because I have the EC meeting going to begin very soon. I will refer to three very distinctive terms, which are very, very important. Sophocles, again and again, concentrates on these ideas. Number one is, in Greek, it is atimos. Atimos or dishonor. From honor to and at the same time, he uses the word doustuchia. Duce in Greek language, duce actually means fortune. Eutuchia means good fortune. Doustuchia means bad fortune. So he is using the word doustuchia. So it is the doustuchia, the ill fortune, that generates the timos, the dishonor of the king. But how does it happen? It is through the constant tension. Constant tension between anathema, I'm using it in the Greek sense, anathema meaning curse, and moira, M-O-I-R-A, moira meaning destiny. So it is a constant tension between curse and destiny. Right. But I believe that this contention, because it's very difficult to decide on a point in this relation. Where is it a play of destiny or is it a play of cards? So this is how it actually works on. But we should rather try to suggest that it is the intermixing, the interplay of cards and destiny, the interplay of anathema and moira that actually brings about a new dimension to the play. So that's why I could say many, many more things, but it's not possible. But I have tried to give you some of my ideas regarding King Oedipus, the way I have read it during this epidemic. And thank you very much for kindly inviting me. There is some disturbance. Okay. So therefore, I'm grateful to all of you for kindly inviting me. Thank you very much. Thank you for giving me this opportunity.
Thank you, Professor Devnaran, for this thoughtful insight into the efficacy of a classical text like Sophocles' Oedipus during a pandemic situation, and the relation that a pandemic has, because two people in position of power, because it poses certain dangers to people in possession of power. So as it is, customary, we don't usually take questions after keynote address, right, Shamim?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, exactly.
So are we ready to move into the next business session, the first business session of this?
Yes, thank you very much. Now I leave.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. On behalf of the organizers, I thank you very much. Thank you for being with us. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Chandra ma'am, for being with us in this webinar. And I would also like to thank Dr. Anud Rai and Dr. Fayez Ahmed Ilkal, our distinguished speakers of today. Actually, this is the third webinar that is being organized by IQAC of AMDANGA JUGAL KISHORE MAHAVIDYALAYA in this month of July, and we have plans for another 3 in this month only. And this would not have been possible without the leadership and guidance of our principal, Dr. Anadi Mohan Rai, who unfortunately couldn't attend today's webinar. He has to attend a very urgent summon from the Bhavan. He had to attend the meeting there. But he has sent his speech, and if you kindly allow me, I will just read it. This
Sure.
is a short speech.
Yes, sir. Please,
Yeah.
sir. Yes, sir.
Please.
Please, sir.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Good morning to all of you. At the very beginning, I sincerely apologize for not being able to share the screen with the dignitaries in today's webinar, organized by the Department of English in collaboration with IQAC, AMDANGA JUGAL KISHORE MAHAVIDYALAYA. Let me seize this opportunity to welcome Professor Devnarayan Bandyopadhyay, Honorable Vice Chancellor, Bankura University, West Bengal. I welcome Professor Chandrabha Chakraborty, Professor and HOD, Department of English, West Bengal State University. I welcome Dr. Arnob Roy and Dr. Fayaz Ahmed Ilkal, two of our noted speakers today. I thank Chirantan Dasgupta, Associate Professor and Coordinator at IQAC, and Sudipto Roy and Samim Reza, Assistant Professors of the English Department of my college, for organizing this wonderful two-day national level webinar on a very relevant topic. I believe the erudite academicians and scholars with their high-end pedagogy shall enrich our participants today, most of whom are our beloved students, research scholars, and fellow academicians. We are running through a very difficult time amid COVID-19. We are fighting against this pandemic together, and everyone is contributing in this cumulative endeavor with his, her limited capacity. I am enthralled that my colleagues in the English department have endeavored to explore the capacity of academicians to contribute in this fight against Corona by selecting a very relevant title for the webinar: Rereading and Recontextualizing Literary Text in Times of Pandemic. I wish new visits of academic inquiry and exploration shall open up with engagement of all our academic dignitaries in this webinar. I wish the success of this webinar. Finally, once again, I thank Professor Devnarayan Bandyopadhyay, Honorable Vice Chancellor, Bankura University, for his gracious presence in this webinar. Thank you all. So this is the inaugural speech that our sir was supposed to give, but I apologize for his absence, and now I'll hand over to
Chandrabha ma'am, please.
Oh, Chandrabha ma'am, sorry ma'am.
Chandrabha ma'am, please kindly introduce Dr. Arnob Roy. He's our next actually speaker for the session.
Sure. I will introduce the next two speakers, and then I will hand over the platform to Shamim and Sudipto just to attend a very important work. Okay. The first speaker is Dr. Arnob Roy. He is the Associate Professor of Robin Mukherjee College, and his paper is titled Re-Contextualizing Tagore's Vision During the Pandemic Through a Reading of Selected Verses. The second speaker is Dr. Fayaz Ahmed Ilkal, Assistant Professor of Rani Chennamma University, Karnataka, who will speak on a critical inquiry of research possibilities in pandemic literature. Thank you very much. Kindly allow me to take leave now to attend a very important work of the university.
Sure, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you.
Over to sir. Over to Dr. Arnob Roy.
Hello, am I audible?
Yes, sir. You are audible and visible.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. Okay. Good. It's kind of becoming afternoon, so good afternoon to everybody. I thank AMDANGA JUGAL KISHORE MAHAVIDYALAYA for giving me this opportunity to speak. Particularly grateful to the principal, sir, IQAC, and the English departments, Shamim Reza and Sudipto Roy. In my introduction, I think I got the title of my presentation was probably presented a little wrong. The title of my presentation is The Politics of AIDS and Strategizing Gay Drama in America. I repeat, The Politics of AIDS and Strategizing Gay Drama in America. DNB sir has presented an excellent keynote in which he took us back many, many centuries ago to ancient Greece. I will bring back our focus onto more contemporary issues, and that is the late 20th century and the outbreak of the AIDS, call it pandemic, call it epidemic, whatever it is, in America in the 1980s and 90s. And I don't know whether I'm going to read and recontextualize, but I definitely read and contextualize American drama, gay American drama, in the light of the AIDS epidemic that broke out in America in the 1980s and 90s. In course of doing this, I will break up my deliberation into three parts. The first will be kind of an introduction where I will introduce you all to the concept of illness, disease briefly, very briefly, and then on to AIDS. Onto the second part where I will contextualize AIDS within principally two American plays, and I will conclude that the last part of my presentation is actually the heaviest, and that is I will deal with a play that is considered to be the magnum opus of the late 20th century American drama. Now, let me begin with this little introduction. I will wish to quote from a book by Susan Sontag, written in 1978, and the title of the book is Illness as Metaphor. Now listen to what she's saying, I'm quoting. Everyone who is born holds dual citizenship in the kingdom of the well and in the kingdom of the sick. Although we all prefer to use only the good passport, sooner or later each of us is obliged, at least for a spell, to identify ourselves as citizens of that other place. Echoing Sontag's metaphor, she's using illness as a metaphor where illness gives us a passport. We already have a passport that takes us to the realm of hell, but this is a passport that we will have to inevitably carry on to our illness. Echoing that metaphor, physician Michael Stein, in his book, The Lonely Patient, How We Study Illness, this was published in 2007, says that illness is a kind of a travel. And look at the metaphor once again. Into a foreign kingdom, that is what he says, quoting from it, or an unrecognized neighborhood. That's again, quote from Michael Stein. Now, illness, as DNB Sir has excellently pointed out, and I suppose all the speakers today will be, today and tomorrow, will be talking about this, that illness has been a very vital vehicle around which powerful tales have been created. So it's an important narrative device in a sense. And one of the important aspects of this is that it functions as a metaphor, a specific metaphor. And what is that metaphor? It can specify, it can function as having multiple registers. But I will speak specifically on one register of the metaphor, and that is failure. Illness signifies failure. The noted American sociologist Talcott Parsons, in fact, says that health is the gatekeeper, I'm quoting from Parsons, to success. And he says that a healthy body and a healthy mind, mens sana in corpore sana, is a basic condition for functioning in a democracy. So in a body politic where the human body is perceived as ill, the illness has symbolized deviancy, passivity, helplessness, detachment, and the abject, A-B-J-E-C-T. DNB sir has already pointed out how the Greeks looked at disease. Two important things. One is from the ancient Greeks and the other from early Christians. Notably, look at disease as a form of divine punishment. It's a curse that has fallen upon the sick. It may be considered to be a supernatural punishment or a demonic possession. The accursed, the person who is sick is accursed, and that is why the person has brought down upon himself an affliction. And the early Christians have actually moralized a lot on this issue of the notions of a disease as a kind of a divine punishment. And why is this divine punishment? Is because there is a deviant practice or a set of deviant practices. So if society has to be brought into quote-unquote health, whatever the definition of health is according to that society, then that deviancy has to be rectified. Now, this is not just relevant to ancient Greece or early Christians. This has been the prevalent attitude even into the modern or the postmodern age. That is the 20th century. And that is what I want to get into, because I'm getting into a very late 20th century kind of an affliction, and that is AIDS. When the AIDS epidemic actually broke out in the early 1980s, there were two slogans that came out in America. One was AIDS, get the facts. The second is AIDS, don't die of ignorance. So one of the ways in which it was found that AIDS could be handled was by getting adequate information, adequate knowledge. So there was this sloganeering that I just read out. And the sloganeering was like, it was circulated. It seemed like that there was a lot of circulation and everybody knew about all this, but the fact of the matter lay in that the circulation was taking place only in the gay press, which was mostly underground and did not have much of a circulation. Therefore, the dissemination of information regarding AIDS, which was considered to be a vital, you can say, weapon with which to fight against AIDS, it was actually not being provided. I'll give you one example. In Britain, around 1986, for the first time, there was a ban that was lifted on gay material. So if the material on AIDS was circulating in the gay press, and if it was banned in Britain till 1986, then how would people in Britain know about the AIDS, whatever AIDS was, whether it was a disease, whether it was becoming an epidemic, pandemic, or however you define it. Now let's get back to America. Only in 1973, now remember that the problem with AIDS was it was becoming an epidemic among the gay population in America. In 1973, as late as 1973, the American Psychiatric Association removed homosexuality from its list of mental disorders. The military, I'm told, the American military even today, pursues a policy that is known as Thingamy, Thingamy, which means don't ask, don't tell. So I know that there are gays, but I'll not talk about them. And AIDS was specifically seen as a gay plague. The fact was not that AIDS can afflict anybody, whether you are homosexual or heterosexual, it doesn't matter. And there was rampant AIDS among people, immigrants from Haiti, the drug addicts, the hemophiliacs, they were all afflicted. But it was branded a gay plague. And it was considered, now look at the connections with 20th century back to the ancient times, that it was a divine curse brought down upon deviant sexual practices. So God has sent this down upon the gay population to eradicate entirely this deviant sexual practice. In the light of this comes out AIDS drama in America. Now, before the epidemic broke up, there was the gay theme. There were gay plays. Gay issues had been handled in different ways by American drama before that. But AIDS was like the flash in the pan. AIDS brought out the gays from the closet. And therefore this outing of the gays, it was necessitated by this epidemic. And outing therefore became a theme in gay drama. Whatever was, we think sexuality is a private practice, but the private domain of sex became public owing to this AIDS epidemic. So the AIDS-directed outing is very important. That has been channelized onto representative modes in American drama. And of course, the exercise of the personal choice. It is a matter of freedom. Sex is a matter of personal freedom, but it does not remain a personal issue anymore. It becomes political. How political? I'll give you one example. One of the major plays to come out, an AIDS gay drama in 1985, was the play The Normal Heart by the dramatist called Larry Kramer. This was an incident that happened in 1989, the fall of 1989, in Springfield in the state of Missouri. The then Southwest Missouri State University was about to mount this very foreboding kind of drama of Larry Kramer's called The Normal Heart. Now, it created a whole lot of pandemonium within Springfield and in the larger scenario in Missouri. The play actually chronicles a gay man's relentless effort to force public attention on the looming AIDS epidemic. But as the advertisements went out through Springfield, people got, many people, not all, got offended by this play because it supposedly, quote unquote, promotes the homosexual lifestyle. This came out in the press, the local press in those days. And there was an outspoken state lawmaker who denounced the college for wasting the tax dollars on such a horrible perversion. Citizens were alarmed and they formed a group actually, Citizens Demanding Standards. There were ads given in newspapers, local newspapers, that this play, if mounted on stage, would actually destroy the very fabric of the American family, obviously the heterosexual family. And this legislator made even such an outrageous claim that heterosexual students who would be performing in this play after the performance would all turn homosexual and obviously would be afflicted by AIDS. You can very well understand the kind of hate mongering that had started. I will quote here from a journal, but it was published by the American Bar Association. The journal is called Human Rights. It was published in spring 1990. It's written by J. Jeffrey Mayhook and Marion Bloss. The title of this paper, this article is Crimes from the Heart. Now listen to what Mayhook and Bloss are saying. I quote, hate crimes have a long and ignoble tradition. You can refer back now to the issue of George Floyd, the black man who was killed by a white police officer. Hate crimes have a long and ignoble tradition, but the stigma of AIDS, which has struck gays and intravenous drug users the hardest, has provided anti-gay forces as well as racists with a new weapon to manipulate anxious heterosexuals into condoning, even advocating, repressive conduct. So AIDS is the justification for the repression of whoever I want to repress actually. whether it be homosexuals or whether it be the blacks who have immigrated from Haiti, so on and so forth, they are all afflicted with this killer disease. Now, in the normal heart, the play by Larry Kramer that I'm referring to, the central character is called Ned Weeks. He tries to enlist the support of New York City officials for generalized AIDS treatment. On the one hand, he does this, and on the other hand, he tries to reform the sex practices within the New York gay community. He is a high-minded crusader who is advocating safe sex on the one hand to the homosexual community, and on the other hand, he is trying to garner support and AIDS treatment from the city officials. His friends, his colleagues are they are taken aback by this high-mindedness of Ned Weeks and think that his advocacy of safe sex is an anti-revolutionary swing back to a feeling of guilt about homosexual sexuality. Now, this play is partly autobiographical because this happened with Larry Kramer. In fact, Larry Kramer was instrumental in setting up in New York an association called ACT UP, A-C-T-U-P, which adds up to AIDS Coalition to Unleash Power. In fact, because of his advocacy of safe sex, he was eventually considered to be counter-revolutionary and thrown out of ACT UP that he had started. So this revisits this play, The Normal Heart. Now, there's another play that I wish to, two plays rather, that I wish to just refer to. Won't go into any details about it. One, they all came out in the same year as the Normal Heart. One is William Hoffman's As Is, and there was a television drama called An Early Frost, written by Daniel Lippman. They all came out in 1985. Now, William Hoffman's As Is charts the relationship between two gay lovers. One is Rich, who leaves his lover's soul and gets infected through another lover, comes back to soul, and then dies, and how they cope up with it. And there is a jocularity within this play. The other play, that is An Early Frost, talks about a noble gay hero who is the primary victim of AIDS. Now, if we put together these three plays, there are a few commonalities that crop up from these plays. One is these AIDS plays are, first of all, very realistic plays. And as realistic plays, they intend to posit gay drama situated within the AIDS epidemic as essentially universal in scope. So whatever is happening to, say, Rich, or whatever is happening to Ned Weeks, or Ned Weeks' lover, and so on and so forth, these are all universal issues. They are afflicting the entire gay population. The second thing that comes out is the heroes are no longer just individuals. That is why it is, in particular, universal. It is or rather, the heroes are representatives of the rest of society. In representing the society, I mean, society means here, of course, the gay community, the helplessness, the pain, the sympathy, and of course, the moral and the political issues that are involved with the gay community afflicted by AIDS. So if one's act can kill, that is, if sex, why is sex no longer a personal matter, but is actually a political issue, is because one's decision to act or not to act becomes highly meaningful in this context. And that is where heroes who refrain from such rampant practices, the word here that I want to insert is promiscuity, which was rampant among the gay population, especially in the New York scenario. If these heroes are refraining from that, they are being universal. If they make heroic sacrifices for their lovers, they are heroes. So universality heroism, these become very important issues in AIDS gay drama. As for instance, at the end of the play, as is, there's a heroic and a very loving gesture on the part of Saul, who comes back to his estranged, AIDS-afflicted lover, Rich, at the hospital, visits the hospital bed of Rich, and accepts Rich as he is. So this is a very grand gesture. And within this grand gesture, there is a certain amount of scapegoating. I cannot go into the details of the scapegoating, because the scapegoating actually happens in ancient Greek tragedies as well. For instance, D.N.B. Sir was talking about the issue of the play Oedipus. And what essentially is Oedipus? He becomes a scapegoat. He's taking away everything for the Thebans. That is essentially what is happening to these gay heroes or the gay characters afflicted by AIDS in these plays. So what the AIDS dramatists are trying to do, they're trying to do two things, directly and indirectly. And directly, AIDS drama, whether it be of Kramer or of Lipton or of Hoffman, they're directly confronting the issue of AIDS in the gay community, and therefore trying to raise awareness. So that's one action that is being undertaken by the gay AIDS drama in America. The second direct action that is done by these plays is it confronts the threat of this disease to the entire modern humanity. Indirectly, the characters in this plays become scapegoats. They are sacrificed to restore health for society. In thus doing, these characters suffer for the whole of society and help reintegrate their liminal brothers, that is the gays. They try to reintegrate the liminal brothers into larger society. So if they are marginalized, there's this effort through the scapegoating of the heroes to bring back from margin to the center of American society, the gay community. And of course, one should not forget that in doing so, though these plays are so realistic that they are very, very 1980s America, but at the same time, they present certain age-old prejudices, beliefs, practices, and forces that are all regressive, that continue even into the late 20th century in America. They confront all that on behalf of the gay community. Coming back to the play The Normal Heart, what is happening in The Normal Heart is, and this seems to be very common among the gay dramatists in America at that time, and that is, The Normal Heart is a scathing indictment of not only New York City at that time, but the larger Reagan administration. You probably remember that Ronald Reagan was the president of America at the time, and the Republican Party was in power. Data for statistics, reports, language, presented through the mouth of irritating character named equal leading this epidemic.
Hello, sir. Hello. Hello, Arnab sir. I think you're having some network problem.
Yes.
Hello. Hello. Hello, sir. I think you're having some network problem. We can't hear you properly. Hello. Are you there, sir? Hello. Sir, are you there?
Am I back? Am I back?
Yes, yes, yes,
Hello?
yes. Yes, yes, yes. Now
Okay.
you're audible, sir.
Yeah.
Yes, yes.
Okay. My apologies. So, going back to the point, Ned Weeks also, on the one hand, he is indicting the establishment, the government, and on the other hand, he is promoting a homosexual lifestyle that refrains from the hypersexuality that was prevalent all across the gay community. In fact, Kramer, in an article that is not an article, it's a book. It's titled "Reports from the Holocaust: The Making of an AIDS Activist." He writes, "I'm sick of everyone in this community who tells me to stop creating a planet. How many of us have to die before you get scared of your ass and into action?" So what is he emphasizing is a need for the stability in gay life on the one hand, and on the other, he is raising awareness of the suffering of the gay community, suffering from AIDS, and therefore he is raising issues about civil rights in America, in the gay community in America. Okay, am I online?
Yes,
Am I
yes,
audible, visible? Okay,
yes,
okay.
yes,
So
yes.
Yes,
I
sir,
will
you
come
are.
to the last. Yeah, okay. How much time do I actually have? Can you tell me, Ronnie? Because
Sir,
I
you
have
can
come
continue.
accumulated. Yeah, I have come to the last part of it, but it's the heaviest part, that is. So I
Okay,
will
you can
come.
continue. You can continue at your convenience. No problem, sir.
Okay, okay. Thank you very much. I will now come to a play that is considered to be one of the greatest American plays ever written, and it's called Angels in America. It's a two-part play, had a Broadway premiere through 1991-92 because it's made of two parts, and the total performance time, if you take the two plays together, is more than 7 hours. So you can call it an epical play. Other than the fact that it is an epic, it is an example of epic theater in the line of Brecht, but I'm not going into all that because that's not relevant today. The title of this play, Angels in America by Tony Kushner. The play is Angels in America by Tony Kushner, contains a subtitle, and the subtitle is A Gay Fantasia on National Themes. I wish to bring your attention to these words once again: gay fantasia, national themes. What is Kushner doing in this play is he is writing the nation of America in the play from the gay or queer perspective. However, I will not go so much into theorizing about queer theory, so on and so forth. That is not necessary here. I will not go into all that. It will become very heavy. So I'll try to keep it as simple as possible. Now this play, as are the other plays that I just mentioned, The Normal Heart, As Is, etc., and our Early Frost, these plays, along with Angels in America, it's set in the context of the AIDS epidemic among gays in America in the 1980s. And that is during the presidency of Ronald Reagan. And like Kramer's The Normal Heart, Kushner's Angels in America has the cultural context of the New York homosexual community that is afflicted by AIDS. Now, within this play, there are multiple themes. I will not go into all those themes. But or rather two important themes that are here in this play. One is the harsh realities of personal relationships within the gay community that is hard hit by the AIDS epidemic. The second is, within this, Kushner is exploring the political turbulence in America and the rest of the world. It's a gargantuan play in scope, that is. It's American, but it's global at the same time. And within this, he presents a millenarian vision. Remember, the play premiered at Broadway through 1991-92. So there's a millenarian vision for the future. However, a millenarian vision that is shrouded in uncertainty. The title of the first part of Angels in America is Millennium Approaches. Millennium Approaches. The play introduces 5 major characters. Roy Cohn, who was is actually a historical character, and the fictional characters Joe, Harper, Louis, and Pryor. And through these, not Roy Cohn, but the other 4 characters, Kushner explores 3 relationships. Number 1, Louis and Pryor's gay relationship that falls apart after Pryor is infected by AIDS. Louis leaves him, has promiscuous sex elsewhere, and then lands up in a relationship with Joe. Joe is married to Harper. That's a heterosexual marriage that is stultifying for him, and he goes out of that marriage and gets into a relationship with Louis, because Joe is actually a closeted gay who comes out through this relationship. But Louis eventually realizes certain problems, certain limitations in his relationships with Joe, takes responsibility, and comes back with a loving, heroic gesture that we had seen earlier in the earlier plays that I mentioned, to the infected Pryor. So these are the 3 relationships. And there is the villain Roy Cohn. Now just 1 or 2 words about Roy Cohn. Roy Cohn was actually a Republican lawyer who stood for, if you know about the witch hunting, the communist witch hunting in the 1940s and 50s, headed by Senator Joseph McCarthy, who headed the HUAC, that is the House Un-American Activities Committee. He was actually the legal counsel of Joseph McCarthy. So Roy Cohn is the Republican, Jewish, conservative, homophobic, ironically homosexual, who is eventually infected by AIDS. I'll come back to Roy Cohn later. Now within these relationships, there are social commentaries that are presented, and a millenarian apocalyptic vision is presented. Part 1, that is millennium approaches, ends with a sense of apocalypse as an angel crashes through the hospital ceiling into the hospital room of Pryor Walter, who is dying of AIDS. Then we move on to part 2, which is called, very significantly, perestroika. Now I will wish to remind you, and students may not know this, about the dissolution of the Soviet Union in the late 1980s and early 1990s, with the advocacy of the policy of Mikhail Gorbachev, which is known as glasnost and perestroika. Kushner picks up that term perestroika, and perestroika means reconstruction, restructuring. That is what he brings in here, and he continues the socio-political commentary that he had done in Millennium Approaches. The characters who had drifted apart in the mayhem and chaos of AIDS, and Pryor landing up in his sick bed, all in perestroika accept their choices, respond to them positively, and become responsible citizens. And this Kushner presents as a positive experience. This positivity is necessary if one takes one takes responsibility of one's own condition, of one's own identity, of one's own relationships and responsibilities, and takes care of others. That is the positivity that Kushner takes out of this play, and that he posits as one of the major panaceas in turning around this epidemic crisis. However, the villain Roy Cohn denies his homosexual, though he is afflicted with it. That's his problem. What is the problem of Roy Cohn is, he tells his doctor, who tells him very bluntly, well, you got AIDS. And Roy Cohn responds and says, AIDS is a homosexual disease. And homosexuals are people who do not have political clout. The word clout is used in the play. And Roy Cohn says, does that sound like me? It's because I have political clout and therefore I cannot be homosexual. So homosexuality is equated with AIDS, is equated with zero clout. He says that I am not homosexual because I have clout. I just sleep around with men. Now look at this perjury, this jugglery of words. And he says, he orders the doctor, you better not write AIDS in my report. You write, I have liver cancer. And this is all historical. That is what actually happened. And that is imaginatively put within the context of this play by Kushner. So Cohn dies a man who is deeply embittered, who fought against homosexuals, against communists, as all being un-American, eventually dies of what he would call a very un-American disease. It's a disease that he has equated with no clout, and yet he dies of that disease. So he does not take responsibility of even his own self, of his own identity. So he is contrapuntal to the other characters, but most importantly, the hero, the central character, who is Prior Walter. The Prior Walter, Prior, that he's presented as a WASP, W-A-S-P, WASP means White Anglo-Saxon Protestant. That is considered in America to be the community, the race that is at the center of American power. And he makes that person, the White Anglo-Saxon Protestant, with Norman ancestry, afflicted by a disease that people supposedly have no clout have contracted. So from a position of center, he is decentered to the margin. But Prior does not run away from his homosexuality and from his AIDS like Roy Cohn. He takes responsibility. He develops as a character, and eventually he ends the play, and that is the note of hope with which the play ends. He refuses to die. He's sent to heaven, but he refuses to enter heaven. He comes back to earth saying, I want more life. And we have to turn this around. We have to go beyond this affliction. We have to accept what we are, that we are inflicted, we are afflicted, we are dying of AIDS, but still there is life. There has to be life. And that is the note on which this play ends. And that is what is the millenarian vision of this play. An interesting aspect of gay AIDS drama, we find it in Larry Kramer, we find it in Tony Kushner as well, is that they all equate the Republican response to AIDS among the gays with the Nazi Holocaust that exterminated millions of Jews. Incidentally, Tony Kushner is a Jew. So there is a Jewish angle to this play. I will not go into that. Interestingly, like Kramer, but he takes away more from Kramer, he kind of extends Kramer's idea, is Kushner says he equates in line three people: Adolf Hitler, Ronald Reagan, and if anybody knows about Slobodan Milosevic, the butcher of Yugoslavia, the Yugoslav carnage, genocide was taking place around that time. So what is he doing? If there is the Hitlerian genocide, if the Milosevician genocide on either side, there is the Ronald Reagan genocide. In withdrawing information about AIDS, in withdrawing information about treatment protocols, in not even making the only available drug at the time was called AZT. The Americans call it AZT, we'll call it AZT. That protocol, the drug, it was made so expensive, it was not made available to most of the gays. So the AIDS situation is political in this sense that it is deliberately harbored to exterminate the American gay population, and Kushner considers this, like Larry Kramer, as a Holocaust that is equivalent to the Jewish Holocaust of the 1930s, 40s, and the Yugoslav Holocaust, or genocide, whatever you call it, in the 1990s. So Kushner is an angry Mathera. He is angry with the political establishment of America. He is angry with the big pharmaceutical companies. He is angry with the pharmaceutical companies because the companies follow a policy of the utilitarian doctrine of capitalism. That medicine is not life-giving. It is profit-making. It is not the register of life. It is the register of death, actually. It is a killer disease. The medicine itself is a killer disease because it is not being made available. And within this, Kushner brings in the 1940s, 50s communist witch hunting, which was also a Republican Holocaust at that time. If anybody knows about the communist witch hunting that had subjected another American playwright to enormous pain, and that was Arthur Miller. He had written a play in response to that, The Crucible. And that era is revisited by Kushner once again. Incidentally, Joseph McCarthy had hounded down Americans, stamping them as un-American because supposedly they had Soviet connections. There was another community that was branded by McCarthy as un-American, and that was the gays. And one of his major acolytes was Roy Cohn. And that is why it's ironical that AIDS will not spare even Roy Cohn. It will afflict. I will just point out to one dimension of Angels in America, which goes into like performance theory a little bit, but this is again laced with the politics of AIDS here. Very thinly, I will present two kinds of theaters that the gay theater in America had kind of practiced. One started around the 1960s, and it's called a Theater of the Ridiculous, initiated by a person called Ronald Cavo, but made very, very popular by two persons. One was John Vaccaro, and the other was Charles Ludlam. Ronald Cavo theorized, taking off from the theater of the absurd. The theater of the ridiculous was an extension of the absurd. It was ridiculous, organized chaos on stage. And it's very difficult to go into the details of the theater of the ridiculous. There's just one or two things. One is that it brought in the camp drag attitude into theater. And camp means a funny, irreverent, non-serious attitude, because that is how the gays were considered at that time, and that is why they were called queer. They were strange. So that is what they brought in. And the other was, other than camp, was this the drag aspect. Drag means dressed as girl. That means cross-dressing. So that is the queering of gender identity. These all were brought into theater of the ridiculous, and it was considered to be a political gesture. The theater of the ridiculous itself was a political gesture, as practiced by Cavo, Vaccaro, and Ludlam. Kushner says that as a political gesture, ridiculous is inadequate. Why does he say so? I will read a little from a piece of interview that Kushner gave. He says the drag gesture is still not completely capable of taking itself seriously. There's still a very heavy weight of self-loathing, I think, that's caught up in it means in the ridiculous. One hates one's own weakness. There's a certain embracing of weakness and powerlessness in the whole of ridiculous, unquote. So what does he do? He moves from the theater of the ridiculous to what he calls the theater of the fabulous. Fabulous, he says, is the political gesture. And what is fabulous according to Kushner? In the same breath, in that interview, Kushner is saying, and I quote again, so there's fabulous in the sense of an evolutionary advance over the notion of being ridiculous. And fabulous also in the sense of being fabled, having a history. That's very important. That we now have a consciousness about where we come from. So fabulous is a development of the ridiculous. Because fabulous, incorporating the ridiculous, the camp, the drag, etc., the queer, they take the queer aspect to a level of seriousness that neither the homophobic society was granting the queers, nor the LGBT, that is the lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender community, the queer community, was conceding for itself. Fabulous gives them that seriousness. So queers, now, by definition, according to Kushner, fabulous means, number one, that there is a history. The history of the gays, that the gays are not the late 20th century sexual freaks performing some atavistically celebrating some orgiastic sexual perversion and bringing down God's wrath of evil because of their evil upon themselves through AIDS. It's not all that. There was gay throughout American history, and epidemics have had a long history. We have to know that history. So it's not that suddenly we are great perverts and we are practicing all this, and thus God has become angry and he has thrown down upon us this epidemic for the first time in the history of humankind. It's all rubbish. Number one. So fabulous means fabled. Fabled as having a history. Fabled as concocting a lie. Now, lie in the sense of creating a fantasy, a fabulation. It's an aesthetic concept that moves away from Kramer's and Hoffman's realism. It is a fantasy in which much of the play takes place in a dream, in which a character can visit heaven, angels can come down, and therefore one can have imaginative look back to the past and even have millenarian visions towards the future. And fabulous also means, it's fabulous. That means it's a word of praise. The gays are fabulous because they were called faggots. Larry Kramer had written a novel that was called Faggots. Faggot was a derogatory term for the gays. So fabulous is the term of enfranchisement. It is the term of empowerment. It gives a history to the gays. It gives a history to disease. And thus it brings the gays to the center of the nation, not to the margins and the periphery. However, AIDS is definitely in Kushner also the site of pain. It's the site of suffering. The body is afflicted by the disease as well as the body politic. So the personal becomes the political as the political becomes the personal. Kushner shows Pryor has contracted blood lesions called Kaposi Sarcoma. And Kaposi Sarcoma is blood red. Look at its brightening image. If you look at it on Google, here it evokes images of dismemberment and pathology. But within that dismemberment and pathology, there is the fabulous, there is the millenarian. So all hope is not actually lost. So what is it up to them? Kramer had advocated, and his hero Ned Weeks had advocated safe sex. Refrain from promiscuity. Kushner says practice promiscuity, because that is what gives you your identity. He dismisses what he calls the Camille syndrome. C-A-M-I-L-L-E. Camille syndrome comes from a French novel called La Dame aux Camélias, written in 1852 by the novelist Alexandre Dumas. This novel is a stern warning to those people who live solely for pleasure. Because if you live for pleasure, according to this novel of Dumas, you lose social respectability because you get disease. You become dead. So you become disenfranchised. Remember what Talcott Parsons said earlier. Kushner says, we have to practice what Dumas says you cannot practice. Ronnie, am I there? Am I there? I will conclude within a minute. Is there a problem here?
No, it's
I
okay,
actually
sir.
cannot hear you. You can hear me? You can hear me, Shudipto?
Yes, sir. Yes.
Okay. So I mentioned this group ACT UP. That Kramer had initiated. ACT UP brought out this slogan. And the slogan is, quote unquote, silence equals to, there was an equal to sign, silence equals to death. So gay drama becomes a discourse that negates silence. It brings in a discourse. We are talking about it. And we are confronting death. Because eventually the point about this entire disease of AIDS is that this AIDS is a non-progressor disease. It is a disease that may not be entirely curable, but it can be slowed down. One can live through 10 years with AIDS if one has the proper medication. And that is where Ronald Reagan becomes a Hitler or a Milosevic. And the big pharmaceutical companies become the accused in the court of law of Tony Kushner, that they have withdrawn the treatment protocols from the gay community afflicted by AIDS. So that points out to the pernicious motives of the political establishment. There's a critic, Lasse Keki, who says that there are two major features that characterize AIDS literature in general. One is rage and the other is remembrance. We can actually see both in Kramer and in Kushner. And therefore, we have to, on the one hand, the play process, fight against the Republican establishment in the play represented by an odious character like Roy Cohn. And on the other hand, we have to present, well, we have to go beyond the disease, because as Pryor says, he wants more life. And thus I'll bring in the last idea about fabulous. Roy Cohn is given the worst cuss words after his death by characters like Pryor, Louis. There's a black homosexual, Belize, who is the nurse of Pryor, so on and so forth. But at the end, that is what is fabulous. They all forgive Roy Cohn for what he is. Because if we have to move forward, we have to resist. We have to represent the afflicted, the marginalized. We resist the power. We represent the disenfranchised. But we reconcile the two, that we resisted and that we represented. And that is why Prior Walter is made the prophet of the new millennium by the angel that visits him, where he can eventually come up with these two ideas of life and forgiveness. So what does AIDS become in the long run, in Angels in America particularly, but in other plays that I pointed out to, is a trope of disenfranchisement, but at the same time, AIDS is also the germ of revolution, because it has created a communal consciousness beyond loss and grief. I will conclude by just a little comparison between William Hoffman's Assays and Larry Kramer's The Normal Heart on the one hand, and Tony Kushner's Angels in America on the other. The first major difference between the two different kinds of gay plays, is that Hoffman's and Kramer's plays are realistic, but Kushner's is fabulous, because it is a fantasia. Secondly, and here there are certain affinities. They're both dark comedies. They both have a combative stance. But whereas particularly Kramer advocates safe sex denouncing promiscuity, Kushner moves away from that and denounces the Camille syndrome and advocates promiscuity, because that gives identity to the gay population. That is where it is a theater of fabulous. And in addition, there's the millenarian vision, and the millenarian vision in Kushner is a transformative vision. And of course, the associated ideas that he borrows from Gorbachev's policies of glasnost and perestroika, two Russian words. Glasnost translates into the English openness and transparency. So he wants that within America today. And that will lead to number two, perestroika, the restructuring of America, and eventually the world beyond our disease. Thank you very much for this patient listening.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much, sir, for your intriguing lecture. And we are in this lecture. It's true that there are some used for example, gay play. But it is somehow to stigmatize the gay community.
Just 1 minute. I'm having some issues with the audio. I can hear myself, but I can't hear you.
Am I audible now, sir?
Yes.
Am I audible now?
No. Shall I go out and come back onto it?
No, Shakuntala is the matter. Let's see what he can do.
Sorry, I can't hear anything. Nothing, Ronnie. I can't hear anything.
Shamil, is it okay?
Let me go out and come back onto it. Let me go. Yes, I'm back. But the audio problem is still persisting. Yeah, it's still there. I can't hear you well. I just can hear
I just
myself.
can hear myself.
Do you want to go
Do you want
to
to
the
go
next speaker? We
to the
can
next
have
speaker?
the
We can have
Q&A
the
later.
Q&A
We
later.
can hear you, sir.
We can hear you, sir.
Hear
We
you,
can
sir.
we can
We
hear
can hear it
we
properly.
can
There
hear
is no
it
problem.
properly. There is no problem
What you are saying,
in
but
what you are saying, but
you can't hear
you
us.
can't hear us.
Ronnie, will it be possible
Ronnie,
for
will
you
it be
to make a
possible for
call
you
to
to
me?
make a call to me?
I said,
I said,
We are having some technical problems. We're trying to sort out things. Hello,
hello,
Mahinda, your
Mahinda, your
voice is not
voice
audible.
is not
You are not,
audible. You are
you are
not,
not audible.
you are not
Can't
audible.
hear.
Can't hear.
I think you are having
I
some
think you
problem.
are having some problem.
Let's do one thing. All of us, let's log out and log in. That can be done.
Okay, let's wait what he has to say because he's looking after all these things. So we are having some technical problems, so we couldn't connect or Nobroi sir. We'll move on to the next speaker, but before that, I would like to make an announcement that tomorrow we have another session and Ananya and Nishargo Bhattacharya and Ananya Chatterjee, they had their lecture scheduled tomorrow, but we have accommodated them today here in this session for some unavoidable reasons. So after Fayaz Ahmed Ilkal sir speech, we'll have Nishargo and Ananya. They will also be delivering their lecture. So now I would like to introduce Professor Ilkal sir. Dr. Fayaz Ahmed Ilkal, Assistant Professor and HOD, Department of Studies and Research in English, Rani Channamma University, Karnataka. He will be speaking on critical inquiry in research possibilities in pandemic literature. So I would like to welcome Sir Fayaz sir, and I would request him to start his lecture. Thank you.
Good afternoon, all. So, just a small correction in my designation. I'm an assistant professor and head of PG Center, not of the university. Okay, so please make a note of it. And then I thank the organizers, the principal, Dr. Anandi Mohan Roy, Chitrandan Das Gupta, Sudipta Roy, and finally my dear friend Samim Reza, and all the fellow participants. It's really a pleasure for me to meet you all and present a topic on the possibilities of research on epidemic literature. Am I audible? Hope I'm audible.
Yes,
Fine.
yes,
Yes,
sir.
sir,
You're
you
audible.
are audible.
Okay. So this is the first time that I'm using this app. I'm not that much habituated. So my screen is shared, right?
Yes, sir, it is shared.
Yes.
I will. You will go solo very soon.
I hope you're watching my PPT, right?
Yes, sir, we are watching it.
Yeah. Okay. Fine. So when Samim approached me about the possibility of this proposed seminar, so this idea came to my mind that why should I not speak about the research possibilities in pandemic literature? And to begin with, I will start with the blessings of Dattatreya Ramchandra Bendre, who is a Gnanapiti awardee and very famous poet from Karnataka, who hails from Dharwad, and that is where from even Girish Karnad is, and I am also from the same place. Let me quote his poem. It is in Kannada. It says, "Savige na ಹೆದರುವುದಿಲ್ಲ, ಯಾಕಂದರೆ ನಾ ಇರೋ ತನಕ ಅದು ಬರೋದಿಲ್ಲ, ಅದು ಬಂದಾಗ ನಾ ಇರೋದಿಲ್ಲ." So I just translated it for you. I'm not afraid of death because it can't come as long as I'm alive. If it comes, I won't be alive. So with this motive and with this enthusiasm, with this new approach, we have to approach this pandemic. Otherwise, it will be very, very horrifying for all of us. And just, I would like to play one video. Imagine you were born in 1900. Million people, and you are alive. I don't think so. Survive the global economic crisis that started with the coronavirus. And survive. When you are Yes, thank you for watching this video. Let me go ahead. So, as you can see in this situation, the scientists are very much busy and putting their all their efforts in order to find out a vaccine. Okay, and what is the role of what is the role of us? We as humanities and we teachers and students of humanities, it is our responsibility to raise above all these things and let us do our job. And our job is to motivate the people in and around us. And this epidemic has been a very, very horrifying one. As in the previous video you have seen, this epidemic and then diseases are not new to the human mankind. So this, especially COVID-19, is considered as an epidemic because it is not just limited to one particular place, region, or country. It has infected the entire globe. So this is what makes me very interesting, and I expect everyone to contribute as much as possible in this area. So now, what we have to do, what does it mean to be human during a major biological crisis like the coronavirus pandemic? We have to seek questions, and we have to even find out answers for this through literature, of course. And I believe that literature is an escape from reality. And not only it is an escape, but it is also a healer. Okay, and it also helps us, allows us to see all of our economic, social, and cultural achievements and challenges suddenly take a backseat to sheer physical fact of disease, contagion, and death. And this is where we come to know what is what, who is who, and where is where. Fine. Literature seeks solutions. Literature gives escape. It gives not only aesthetic pleasure, but it also gives hope. What can the humanities, the study of what it means to be human, offer to help us survive such trauma? In this time, the literature offers important insights into how people have dealt with the trauma of pandemics in the past and how to make sense of a world now in many ways beyond our control. So as I had told you previously, that what the role of literature here is to lift us, to transform us, to take us from despair to hope. Literature plays. We can look forward to literature as an escape from all these daily drudgeries, fear, anxieties, and literature also gives a solution through poem. So whichever form of literature it may be, and I'm a strong believer that literature plays a role as a healer. And then before approaching upon the details about epidemic literature, let us get some basic information about the definitions. And what is epidemic, what is pandemic, and what is an outbreak? Just for your understanding, I have just noted it down. An epidemic is a disease that affects a large number of people within a community, population, or region. A pandemic is an epidemic that's spread over multiple countries or continents. Endemic is something that belongs to a particular people or country, and an outbreak is a greater than anticipated increase in the number of endemic cases. In case also, it can also be a single case in a new area. If it's not quickly controlled, an outbreak can become an epidemic. And now, I believe that this, thanks to COVID-19, of course, on the the good side of it, we should always look at the bright side of whatever comes in our way. So I have divided for our understanding the new normal versus the old normal. So what is new normal and the old normal? Old normal is something which is opposite of new normal. And what is new normal? New normal is abstaining us, stopping us from going out, and by being social with the people. And then there are so many limitations. Earlier, our life was going out, cheering, partying, meeting. Everything was so normal. That was our old normal. But now, since December 2019, since we have come across this virus, we have been forced, not only forced, but we are being what I should say exactly. We are asked. It may be, again, it differs from region to region and globe to globe. We are forced, we are asked, we are requested. So you can change those terminologies. So here, the new normal for us is being confined to the four walls of the house, taking all the precautionary measures of us not being infected and not infecting others as well. Okay, so now as a researcher, or as if you want to for a project or for your MPhil or for your PhD or even for a research paper, or how you have to approach this new normal and old normal. COVID-19 must be most studied pandemic ever in the history of mankind. As I had told earlier also, that this has been the pandemic, and it will remain as the most horrifying disease in the history of the world. Why? Because it has not limited to only one region of the globe. In fact, it has almost covered the entire globe, and now we are the third infected world, highest infected number in the world. So this is what makes me, other than these, there are so many aspects which makes us to ponder upon, to invest our time and energy into this pandemic literature. This has come like an opportunity for researchers to approach such pandemics and epidemics from. And such diseases are like signifiers of culture and its deep-seated values and fears, which is there in our society. So first thing, other than literature, you can take up this COVID-19 situation as a case study for learning, teaching and learning kind of a thing. Of course, it has its own limitations, drawbacks, positivities, negativities, and this can be a very important case study for English language teaching and English for specific purposes or specific problems as such. And then COVID and online ELT, ESP, there is sudden boom of online language and literature teaching due to COVID. And of course, you and I all have been facing all these technical issues, and especially those who are near to retirement or who are in their ripe ages, they are unable to cope up. Even the young minds, they are unable to, because almost even today also from 10 o'clock or from 11 a.m. I had to be right in front of the computer. The so is with the participants. It's very, very tiring, but then nevertheless, you have to ensure that you have internet, you have power, and so many other things which you have to take case. And this can also be a case study. Fine. So don't be limited to only literature. So these are all multidisciplinary areas which you can harp upon, which you can think upon, and which you have to take because you are answerable to the society. And synchronous and asynchronous learning language and literature happening indoors. It has its own negativities and it has its own positivities. Negativities, as I told you, and then even the tender students, they have to be right in front of the computer, and that has an impact on their health. And the government, both central as well as the state governments, have been time in time, they have been making some amendments. And now in Karnataka, I don't know about the other states, but in Karnataka, up till 5th standard, they have stopped online classes. And then, of course, you have been following all these things. Let me not go let me not dwell much deep into that. And then when we speak of challenges, every teacher has to become a tech savvy to teach English. So now, this is again a very interesting topic. Okay, earlier we were discussing, we have been so much of research as English as a second language. Okay, and now technology has again come as a nightmare for those who, first of all, they are afraid of English, and then they want to take English as a secondary, they want to learn English as a secondary language. And now technology has become a kind of they feel that they are handicapped, they are brushed aside, they are outdated, so on and so forth. And then social insecurity of opening the teacher's home in front of a web camera, because even you can see here at the background, I have very limited. So sometimes we feel that we are exposed. Okay, we may be not having those facilities. Even the same can be said about the students as well. So all these things, they fall under this category called ELT and ESP. So please take up these issues from this perspective. Take up research. And then challenges and opportunities. This pandemic has to be taken as a challenge as well as opportunity. So work from home is a new slogan, as our beloved Pradhan Mantri had called, "Jaan hai to jahan hai." तो जहां है तो हम हैं, वरना कोई नहीं है. So teaching, learning, a case study of ELT and ESP, and then free online courses. So now even I have been a part of so many online courses with permission, without permission from the officials. I have undergone so many online courses, and even now also I am still part of it. No other than lecture, giving talks in various platforms. As I told earlier to Reza sir, that I am not that much habituated with this app, though I have been very much comfortable with Zoom app. So now in the market there are so many apps. So this is again a kind of an hindrance, which may also have an impact. So this is again an interesting topic to survey about, or you can think about writing a research paper. And then online teaching as well, it can be considered as a boon or a bane, and even online courses, and then online lecture series, national and international webinars, of which we are part now, and we have been earlier, and which we will be hopefully, but not it may not stretch for a long, hopefully, thank God. Let's pray for that. And then workshop, FDP, so on. And then other than this, there is one more very interesting topic which I would like to throw focus upon. Now what we have become vulnerable to this social media, and whatever we do, whatever even small things also, there is a rat race that, see, I have done this, see, I have done that, and whatever it is, whether it is useful or not, we just post it on Facebook, and even on WhatsApp, and then Instagram. These are all they are killing our time, and other than these, the other things, it is also having an impact on our lifestyles. Because those radio rays and all those things, they enter our body, and almost for we go late night to the bed, and then that also has an impact on our health. And now this again will interest feminists, how they will take, I don't know, but now because of a stay at home kind of a thing has been forced upon, or it's a new slogan, we can find that there are so many models and actresses have their own customized apps, and then they ask you to take a membership of it, and then daily they send their pictures, their videos, and the more they expose, the more you have to pay. Of course, it has its own limitations, and whether they come under the legality or not, I don't know. I'm not much aware about it, but this is what one can think upon, and this is an area so wherein this commodification may interest feminists. This is a new way of commodifying women. Other than that, one more area I'd like to throw your attention, or I would like to drag your attention to, is most of the novels are adapted into movies. So now the number of the readers, the strength, the number of the readers is coming drastically down. Of course, but then also, as it was earlier, somewhere in 18th century, literature was written only to a specific class of the society or elite class of the society. The same can be said about today's generation. Hence, movies has become a very, since we are not getting good scripts, the producers are switching over to novels which are being bestsellers, and some of the good novels written by good writers, and they are adapting and they are making series. For example, Sacred Games, and then Arvind Adiga's Selection Day, and so on and so forth. Again, you can just invest your time into that also, and that can also become a very interesting topic for any of kind of a research. a smaller or bigger one. And then movies not getting opportunity to release their movies. And then I will come back to it later. I have some 3-4 slides with respect to that aspect. And then OOT platforms as a substitute. Since there has been lockdown, there are lots of problems. The malls have, everything has been closed. Even the theaters are not been spared. So now this OOT platform has come as substitute for these producers, and they are lined up. There's so many movies have been lined up for releases, but offline. But since because of lockdown, they have been forced to release their movies on OTT platforms. OTT is over the top. Over the top means those apps through which we watch movies online. And there is again a very interesting story here you can think about. Earlier, these plays and all, they started in churches, and then slowly it transformed from church to streets, and then from streets to theater, and from theater to our laptops and mobiles. This is again a very interesting study, so one can think upon. And then the coronavirus scare started in March, and since then the lockdown is not getting over. Everyone is coping with it in a specific way. More people than ever are now using streaming services for much needed entertainment during the lockdown. Many film releases have been postponed, and some are releasing on digital platforms such as Amazon Prime Video, Netflix, Disney Hotstar, Z5, to name a few, and so on and so forth. So this gives us a very traumatic experience of unfortunate suicide of Sushant Singh, and which have been also a very follower of him, and I have been personally very a great appreciator of his acting skills. Especially I liked his movie Kaposi. And that is again can be studied as from a psychoanalytical perspective, as how. And the other day, yesterday, my son was telling that almost 4,000 TikTok and even YouTube video makers have committed suicide. And this is again a very interesting area to harp upon. And this is an adaptation of The Fault in Our Stars, Hollywood movie. And then one more movie in which Akshay Kumar plays a role of a transgender. And it is a remake of Tamil movie Muni 2 Kanchana. This is again slotted for the month of July. This month maybe, or maybe this month or next month, it is going to be released on OTT platform. And I'm very much eagerly waiting for this movie and the earlier movie as well. And this movie, Gunjan Saxena, the Cargill girl. This movie stars Janhvi Kapoor, and there she plays the role of Lieutenant Gunjan Saxena, popularly known as the Cargill girl. She was the first Indian Air Force woman officer who went to war and played an important role in rescuing injured soldiers during the Cargill War in 1999. She made history during the war, and so was awarded the Gallantry Shaurya Veer Award for her bravery. Dharma Productions and Z Studios are the joint producers of the film. And then one more, Shakuntala Devi, the human computer. So this is again another Bollywood film. Joining the list of biopics this season is Shakuntala Devi with Vidya Balan as the protagonist. This biological drama revolves around the journey of the real-life genius Shakuntala Devi, popularly known as the human computer. Excuse me. She was also a great mathematician, writer, and astrologer, alongside the incredible Vidya Balan, Sanya Malhotra, so on and so forth. And again, this movie is slotted to release on Amazon Prime Video soon. So I just handpicked some of the upcoming movies on OTT platform. If you can just go to Google, you will get a number of lists which will keep you interested. Okay, and then there is one more movie which many have spoken about, and which is very much apt to the present condition which is going on. And that movie is a Contagion, prophetic movie of Corona. It is an American thriller, and which was released in the year 2011 and directed by Stephen Soderbergh. Its ensemble cast includes Marion, and the list is there. And the plot concerns the spread of virus transmitted by respiratory droplets and foments attempts by medical researchers and public health officials to identify and contain the disease, the loss of social order in a pandemic, and the introduction of a vaccine to halt its spread. They follow several interacting plot lines. So please watch this movie, and that will keep you very much interested, and that will give a food to your food to thought. And then there is one link which I would like to share with you. Is it visible? Hello? Hello?
Yes, sir. It's visible,
Yeah,
sir.
okay, fine. Yeah,
Yes,
yeah.
sir, you're visible.
Fine, thank you. Yeah, thank you. And then if you go to this page, I was also browsing Google, and then I came across this very interesting page of University of Toronto. So here on the left side, you can see there are some books which can help you as a reference material. And there are books on all the diseases, like there are journals, reference works, and books on plague, on smallpox, yellow fever and malaria, cholera, typhus, tuberculosis, influenza, colonialism and epidemics, indigenous peoples and epidemics, HIV/AIDS, SARS, Ebola, Zika, and COVID-19. And then you can see here there are a number of books. If I scroll it, it has so much of data. So just at leisure, you can just use these books as foundational texts to build your argument with the help of a text from literature. And then there is Armies of Pestilence, Epidemics by Samuel Quinn Cohen, which is very much interesting text which you have to read in order to understand the influence of epidemics, the drawbacks of epidemics, post-epidemic and past epidemic. You can make a note of it, and then there are so very interesting reference books on which you can build upon your argument. Likewise, there are two texts which has drawn the attention of critics and the readers across the globe. One is Amitav Ghosh, the Great De-Arrangement, which deals about the climatic change and then the global warming, so on and so forth. And people from this area are very much known to Amitav Ghosh and were most liked writer for you all. And then the plague, Albert Camus' Plague. These two have been drawn the attention of critics as well as readers and thinkers across the globe. And then the Great De-Arrangement, Climate Change and the Unthinkable is the subtitle of the text. And it is a non-fiction book addressing climate change by an Indian writer, Amitav Ghosh, published somewhere in the year 2016. And this text is divided into 3 chapters. Please read this. That will expand your horizon about climatic change and even on epidemics and pandemic literature. And just a visit to pandemic literature in text. Writers over centuries have explored the impact of epidemics in prose and verse. As we struggle with the outbreak of COVID-19, we must remember that the human tryst with epidemics is as old as the hills. From Antonine plague and the plague of Justinian, great bubonic plague in Europe, Spanish flu, HIV, Asian flu, and so on and so forth. So it was Homer who first used the term epidemios for the returning natives in Odyssey. The word for first advocated as a medical term in a treatise by Hippocrates to mean that which circulates or propagates in a country. Writers over centuries have explored the impact of epidemics in prose and verse. And then you can find the early traces in work of Boccaccio, the Decameron, which also influenced Geoffrey Chaucer to write Canterbury Tales. So this is a text about wherein his protagonists are 7 women and 3 men, and who retreat to a villa outside Florence to avoid the pandemic, writes the Guardian's Louis II, referring to the bubonic plague or Black Death that ravaged Europe in the mid 14th century. There, isolated for 2 weeks, they pass the time by telling each other stories, and lively, bizarre, and often very filthy stories at that, with a different theme for each day. So the same theme we can find in the Canterbury Tales as well, and that was the style of narration or telling tales was a common theme in those days. And then Daniel Defoe's. A later outbreak of bubonic plague in London inspired another writer, Daniel Defoe, to write the Journal of the Plague Year, which is set in 1655 and published in 1722. The novel was likely based in part on the journals of the author's uncle, writes Globe, and so on and so forth. Someone has not unmuted. Sorry, someone has unmuted himself. Please mute. So now living with death. So the same experience we are also facing. When our government lifted the lockdown, it was understood that we have to live with it. We can't escape with it, but with taking some measures and precautions. The plague was posting sentries at the gates and turning away ships bound for Oran, wrote Albert Camus. For contemporary readers, the fictional examination of pandemic is almost synonymous with Camus' The Plague. The seminal allegorical work is a critique of repugnant materialism as well as a graphic account of human confrontation and cohabitation with death. So, how true these words ring today? Many continued hoping that the epidemic would soon die out and their families be spared. Thus, they felt under no obligation to make any change in their habits as yet. Plague was an unwelcome visitant bound to take its leave one day as unexpectedly as it had come. So that's why these texts, these works of great writers are great because they have stood in the time, they are all time tested and they are still relevant. That is what makes a text great. And then as a researcher, what you can do here, Camus meticulously studied earlier histories and literature going back to Thucydides' account of a typhus plague that ravaged Athens. Later, writers explored and expanded the plague metaphor further. Notable among these is Jews Saramago's sorry, I can't spell it. And then this novel on which one can take up research and has already drawn attention of critics as well as readers and speakers and research scholars across the globe. So let us have some information about Albert Camus. Of course, he is a very known figure to all. This is just a brief introduction which I had just picked in order to give you some information about him. And then he here in Plague, Camus used, okay, I may be using, I may be pronouncing Camus or Camus, don't go by that. So Camus used as a source material the cholera epidemic that killed a large proportion of Oran's population in 1849, but situated the novel in the 1940s in order to make it very much relevant and contemporary. And Oran and its surroundings were struck by disease several times before Camus published his novel. According to an academic study, Oran was decimated by bubonic plague in 1556 and 1678, but all later outbreaks were very far from the scale of epidemic described in the novel. So here the plague was posting sentries. It has been covered up. It is a repetition. Sorry for that. And then, yeah, epidemics in literature. As we have discussed, the plague is considered as an existentialist classic despite Camus' objection to the label. He never wanted it to be studied as an existential work. The novel stresses the powerlessness of the individual characters to affect their destinies, the very pith of absurdism. So they're the same kind of situation you and I are facing. And it's very much easy for us to relate ourselves, and it has been very much relevant as well. So the narrative tone here is very much similar to that of Kafka's, especially in the trial, whose individual sentences potentially have multiple meanings, the material often pointedly resonating as stark allegory of phenomenal consciousness and the human condition. So Camus included a dim-witted character misreading the trial as a mystery novel, as an oblique homage. I will skip this. And then I will share one more web page to you so that we can take up research on this area, and which is called as electric literature. Here in this page, the web page creator has jotted out some 12 novels which will be very much interesting and which will help us to carry our research. And the first text is Severance by Ling Ma. So here, this novel also deals with the same kind of an pandemic. So here, it is about the disease which infects the workers in mining, and their infection because of some semi-precious stone. And then suddenly what happens, the disease spreads through the world via the mass-produced cheap junk produced in Chinese factories, turning the population into zombies who are doomed to repeat the same actions until they die. So I will not go much in detail. And then The Dreamers, a novel by Karen Thompson Walker. So here the survivors are forced into quarantine. This also deals with some epidemic. It deals with a plague which has taken over a small college town in the middle of nowhere. And then the survivors are forced into quarantine on campus and forbidden from leaving in case they spread the illness to the wider population. And then The Dreamers is a propulsive novel about the lengths we will go to in order to survive. And then They Came Like Swallows, written by William Maxwell, which also deals with a global epidemic, and which is based upon 1918 Spanish flu. And then Station 11, a novel written by Emily St. John Mandel, which deals with a viral pandemic, and ours, COVID-19, is a biological pandemic. And then The Year of the Flood, Margaret Atwood's, and then Blindness, and then Zone 1, and then Pale Horse, Pale Rider, The Dog Stars, Wilder Girls, The Last Town on Earth, Mary Shelley's The Last Man. So you can help yourself by visiting these and reading these texts, and accordingly you can apply to your purpose. And then about some superstitious beliefs as well, I would like to throw light upon, and some of them, they feel that it is a wrath of deities. However, beyond this Eurocentric portrayal of epidemics, there were also indigenous accounts. Celebrated Hindi poet like Suryakant Tripathi's memoir, A Life of Missapent, provides a heart-rending account of the influenza epidemic that ravaged India during the early years of the 20th century. I traveled to the river bank in Dalamo and waited. The Ganga was swollen with dead bodies. And at my in-laws' house, I learned that my wife had passed away. And then your very own Bengali writer Sarat Chandra Chattopadhyay's works, Malaria is an inevitable part of rural life. His central protagonists, Ramesh in Pali Samaj and Brindaban in Pandit Mase or Sri Kanta in Srikanta, are frequently portrayed as altruists eager to take on the arduous tasks of rescuing pandemic afflicted villagers oblivious to the danger of contagion. Interestingly, the villagers held the wrath of deities responsible for diseases like plague, cholera, and smallpox, and made offerings to goddesses like Olabidi, Sitala, Manasa, Bonobidi, Olai Chandia, others, etc., etc. And you will find such traces now in any of the Indian English language literature. It may be Bengali, it may be Hindi, it may be in Gujarati, it may be in Kannada, but that again is a very interesting area to dwell upon. And then epidemics feature in Tagore's novels too. In Chaturanga, when Calcutta is scourged with plague, Sach's compassionate uncle converts his home into an infirmary for the poor, but while nursing the patients, succumbs to the disease. And they are now, we call them as corona warriors. And I am also strongly believe that we teachers are also corona warriors, because we are keeping our students confined to the four walls of the house, and we are not allowing them to get diverted, and we are making them strong mentally to face such situations and incidents. And then literature in responding to epidemics celebrates the enduring range of human responses, the gamut of feelings that rage against the onslaught of disease and death. We will no doubt see poets and writers chronicle the current difficult times too. So with this, I sum up my entire argument. Thank you for a patient hearing. And you can reach out to me on fayazilkul@rcup.ac.in, and then my mobile number is there on your screen. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Sudipta, am I audible? Sudipta, am I audible?
Yes, you are audible.
Okay.
So hope I have lived up to your expectations. I don't know how much I was able to address your concerns.
It was definitely a wonderful presentation, sir. Thank you, Dr. Fayaz Ahmed Ilkal, for his very enlightening speech. And Dr. Fayaz Ahmed Ilkal, he has tried to explore various possibilities of research by connecting the literary texts at one hand and the pandemic at the other hand. Thank you once again. And now I shall once again return back to Dr. Arno Bray, is already with us. Thank you, Dr. Arno Bray, for your splendid and illuminating presentation. As convener of this webinar, I would like to seize this opportunity to thank Dr. Arno Bray for enriching our knowledge that your paper has, and I would like to further add that your paper, your speech has rightly striken the chord of the concept note of the webinar. At first hand, I see, though I am not really authorized to speak on the topic that you have spoken on, still I see that you have tried to focus elaborately on how politics had shamelessly played a vicious and very ugly role in the spread of AIDS epidemic in America, among the gay community in particular. At the other hand, I see it is highlighting the fact that how much political ideologies and stand can really affect a large group of people and even can trigger genocidal motive. Thank you once again for your illuminating speech, which shall motivate many scholars to rethink and reread literary text and recontextualizing them on a political social background. Sir, Dr. Honorable, sir, we had few questions. May I proceed with the questions?
Yes, of course, yes. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Yes, I can hear
you. Sorry to interrupt, Samin, but I need to leave. I have some other work. Please excuse me.
If you can go ahead with
please.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Faiz Ahmed, for being with us. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. There is one Mr. Orkoprabhu Banerjee. He mentioned that social distancing is gradually becoming social ostracizing in 2020. It's the divine punishment or passport to hell, as you quoted. How can we overcome the psyche of public in general? Can you hear me? Public in general. Once again, I repeat, social distancing is gradually becoming social ostracizing in 2020. It's the divine punishment or the passport to hell, as you quoted. How can we overcome the psyche of public in general?
This is very difficult to answer because I was talking in the context of one particular epidemic and a particular cultural and social and political context. It's very difficult to say how we can overcome the psychological problems that people generally have. It's simply that, first of all, we have to understand that I think there are two aspects of that question. The first is passport to hell and social ostracization. These are basically social constructs, and we all live on the basis of many social constructs. It's not just, I talk about disease, for instance. What about the color of the skin? I in passing mentioned, in fact, the problem of racism still afflicting America. That itself is a kind of a disease. It's an epidemic. We haven't been able to overcome that. I cannot speak for how people will be able to overcome the psychological barriers and forget about ostracization. Of course, the two issues of COVID-19 and AIDS are not the same, in the sense that in the case of COVID-19, we definitely desire not social ostracism, but I have a problem with the word term social distancing, rather say physical distancing, which I generally do not see. Ronnie, I suppose you also don't see when we visit the tea stalls around the roads. The people are embracing each other. But when it comes to homosexuality, then we have a huge problem with that. That is where we have to bring in distancing and ostracizing and so on and so forth. So the minorities, that is what we have to think about. We have to overcome that. We have to think of how we can overcome our own age-old prejudices. Sorry, just a second, Ronnie. I'm running out of data now, so I have to shift gear. Can you please give me 1 minute?
Yes, sure, sir, sure.
Am I audible?
Yes, yes. You are.
Yes.
You are audible.
Yes, yes. Now, when I was talking about this American AIDS gay drama, you have already seen that there are two different approaches, where there are some convergences, there are some divergences. One important thing that I think comes out of all this, whether you agree with me or agree with somebody else or disagree, we will have certain differences. But essentially, it is very important, the slogan that ACT brought up, that is silence equals to death. So if you know that there is ostracization, then go on speaking against ostracization. That is where we need to insert our discourses. The more we remain silent, the more we give encouragement to this ostracization. At least as of now, that seems to be the only solution that I have. Yes.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. No more questions, sir. Thank you very much for being with us. No more questions, sir. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
So, thank you. Over to Sudipta Roy. Please introduce Ananya Chatterjee and Nisargo.
So our next speakers are Professor Ananya Chatterjee, who is Assistant Professor, Department of English, Balurghat College, and Nisargo Bhattacharjee, PhD scholar, FLU, Hyderabad. So they will be speaking on recontextualizing Tagore's vision during the pandemic through a reading of selected verses. That's their topic, and I would like to request them to start delivering their lecture. Thank you.
Are we visible and audible?
Yes, yes, you are. Okay.
Hello, and a very good afternoon to our esteemed chairperson and also to our audience. Before we begin our presentation here, we would like to extend our heartfelt gratitude to the organizers of this webinar, especially Professor Reza and Professor Roy, who have provided us with the opportunity to speak on this esteemed platform. Today, we shall be speaking on recontextualizing Tagore's vision during the pandemic through a reading of selected verses. Since human beings are social creatures, death and its rituals are very significant to almost all the societies in existence. The traditional philosophers may speak of the essential solitude of the experience of death. Each one of us exits the world just as we came in. However, the fascination with death is as old and is arguably central to human civilization. Thus, Martin Heidegger regards death as potentially the most original expression of, I quote, being in the world. For Dasein, or being there, that is the kind of existence which is particular to humans. And Jean-Luc Nancy sees the state of being with as preceding even instances of individual death in his book Being Singular Plural. Particularly in this time of crisis and global disease, human beings are deeply in need of one another. The idea of an ideal death is still anchored in the minds of people, which might be the image of a deathbed of an aged person encircled by his friends and family. Yet, the risky nature of COVID-19 pandemic has ensured that any kind of human gathering would be very, very dangerous for the entire community. Through a historical analysis of the role of pandemics in Rabindranath Tagore's literary output, our paper establishes how the past speaks to the present that is in crisis. Okay, I'm showing you slide 2. Here are the covers of a few relevant texts at the moment. If we refer to the later medieval writings, already mentioned by Dr. Ahmed, Boccaccio's Decameron, then Pardoner's Tale from the Canterbury Tales by Chaucer. These lay a heavy emphasis over human behavior at the moment of disease and death. Even some of these authors were of the opinion that plagues do not discriminate between the good and the evil, but bring about a complete collapse of the social conventions due to the immense loss of lives and property, resulting in a steep rise in selfishness and greed. For instance, the threat of COVID-19 had initially scrapped all stores of masks, sanitizers, hand washes all of a sudden. People selfishly started hoarding these products to ensure their own safety and comfort without paying any attention to the scarcity being created in the market due to this particular thoughtless action, which would inevitably result in some people going without these products, and the pandemic might very well arrive into their own homes through these unfortunate people who have been deprived of the access to the necessary precautions. The fear of contagion increased vices like avarice and corruption, which paradoxically led to more and more infection being spread, which may have resulted in ample deaths, both moral and physical. Now take a look at the next slide. Note the beaked design of these masks. The reaction of the human beings during epidemics and plagues have been reflected in several journals, as mentioned in the previous paper, like since Homer we have seen it, like the Journal of a Plague Year by Daniel Defoe, which was lengthy and detailed narrative of events, statistics and memoirs of the Great Plague in London that took place in 1665. The need for a moral center during such times of such crisis is answered by writers like Rabindranath Tagore or Albert Camus.
When death and loss reign as ubiquitous phenomena, no form of continuity is realizable other than the state of continuous mourning. The atmosphere of bereavement therefore imparts a strange majesty to the grieving subject that is conditioned, as we do see in Tagore's poem Shah Jahan. I quote from the poem: "You knew pretty well, ruler of India, O Shah Jahan, the surges of time take away all life and youth and riches and honors. The unique wish of the emperor was to perpetuate only your innermost sorrow." Quote ends. The emblem of in this slide evokes the uncontested reality of death. Like the Shah Jahan of his poem, Tagore experienced losses throughout his life. He witnessed the ravages of the cholera pandemic that began in the plains of the Ganges and extended globally, lasting from 1863 to 1875. Malaria and smallpox were other frequent causes of death. The late 1890s saw the invasion of the bubonic plague from China to India, also known as the Hundred Years' Plague, whose gravest phase in India lasted till the 1920s. The death count in India exceeded millions. In 1918, again, Tagore saw how the spread of the Spanish flu resulted in a shortage of logs to cremate the dead bodies. The picture here is symbolic of the general condition during the Spanish flu. Tagore experienced the premature deaths of many of his family members, including his mother Sharada Devi in 1875, his sister-in-law Kadambari Devi in 1884, his wife Mrinalini Devi in 1902, Renuka Devi, his daughter, in 1903, his son Shomendranath Tagore in 1907, and his daughter again Madhurilata Devi in 1918. These plethora of experiences of death, disease, and personal loss brought about the realization of grief as a paradoxical expression of human permanence. Upon being anointed by grief, his Shah Jahan transcends the worldly majesty associated with the splendor of diamonds, pearls, and jewels, I quote from the poem, that are subject to time, and instead embodies the majesty of artistic beauty that grief can realize. A majesty that does, quote, entice the heart of time with beauty's seduction, quote ends. The line on the screen exemplifies Tagore's outlook regarding the enlightening capacity of the experience of death. This transcendental quality uplifts the human being to a metaphysical plane on which he can communicate with death in its essential form, greeting formless death clad in a wondrous, deathless attire, as he puts it in the poem. Also, at the point where the human being confronts death, he or she realizes the pinnacle of self-actualization, not just as an individual singularity, but also as a component of the collective humanity. As Tagore implies in the Pilgrimage, death is the touchstone or poroshmoni that conveys the immortality of the soul. I quote, "Through death he has been resuscitated to our lives, that great conqueror of death," quote ends. Now, the pronoun us is of prime importance. The self-actualization that death can impart is unachievable without the cognitive medium of the collective us, a collective in which the spiritual continuity of human being is manifested. This philosophical outlook encourages the practical considerations expressed in this slide, the virtues of reflection. This intensely constructive aspect of Tagore's philosophy regarding death is relevant in today's corona crisis since it manifests the pandemics maintains that the pandemic need is not be a cause for mindless panic and selfish action. It can also be the occasion for reflective action and self-realization. This is an occasion for actions that are informed by the knowledge that the sense of commonality underlying the idea of a self becomes most apparent as the hour of death approaches.
Okay, so in his poem, Admonition from the collection The Borderland or Prantik, the poet looks at the divine in the form of the destroyer precisely because he has supposedly sent, I quote, the emissary of death to accept the poet into the darkness that opened up to, I quote, the cosmic splendor. However, the poet's mind lacked the serenity necessary for being invited to, I quote, the luminous sphere, and therefore he is turned away. This act of deeming unworthy, of turning one away, initiates a reflection since the poet now wants to measure up to that which he is lacking. Tagore waits for the day when once again he will be able to clean the invitation and and that action shall bring him, I quote, the plentiful joy, within quotation, much like ripe fruits, potents. He relates his idea of the divine with that of death and goes on to equate them with the idea of his own poetic inspiration. Consequently, he shall learn, I quote, the final value of life, potents, in the face of death, make the final trip, and accept the final invitation. It's a very small poem which I shall be reading out to you. The emissary of death appeared, O destroyer, all of a sudden from your palace. He led me to your vast precinct. Mine eyes met darkness. I could not gaze how the light was absent in the piles of obscurity inside the heart of hearts. That light, which is the splendor of the cosmic splendor, mine own shadow veiled my view. The ritual hymn of that light shall reverberate from the deep cavern of my being in the luminous sphere at the frontier of creation where I had been invited. I shall assume the extreme dignity of the poet on the theatre of life for which I had learned to vocalize. The lute of the terrible lay silent. Mute was the new melody of the dawn. At the bottom of the mind emerged no serene face of the dreadful. Hence you turned me away. When once again you shall return, much like ripe fruits, heavy with plentiful joy, in silence the words of the poet shall fall. On the infinite's offering tray, at last shall be fulfilled the final value of life, the final trip, and the final invitation. Quote ends.
This uncertainty of death is indeed relatable to those of us who, upon observing mild symptoms of corona in oneself, perhaps felt relieved that the virus is no more an uncertain abstraction that threatened him or her. Instead, it is here to be dealt with at once. And yet, when those symptoms prove to be false alarms, he or she again feels despair upon the return of the uncertainty. In those moments of frustration and near-death experience, is not one forced to reflect upon life anew? Do those moments not fill one with regrets for things not done and attentions not devoted? Does the pandemic, in its own curious ways, not generate in us aspirations for personal worthiness? Now, apart from this metaphysical category of death, however, Tagore has been equally aware of the social and political nature of death. Death, in its formless nature, replicates the absolute unpredictable nature of the contagion during a pandemic. Tagore knows the indiscriminate nature of the formless death affects not just a king but any human being of any class, and therefore the majesty he speaks of in Shah Jahan is not a possibility for only selected elites. The formlessness of death or contamination of pandemic became evident during the 1896 plague pandemic, since the medical practitioners were unable to determine whether the plague can reside in the human body in a dormant form, and in the same manner we are presently unsure about the actual estimate of people affected by corona because we know it can exist in a dormant form and also manifest in asymptomatic way, in asymptomatic ways. Sorry. But while death in its abstract form, often represented by him with a capital D, is indiscriminate in its manner, death as concrete phenomena can be experienced as a discriminating phenomena. Since the nature of the experience differs along social and economic divides, the racial difference between the patient and the medic in this slide is striking. During a pandemic, not every section of the population receives the same access to treatment and care, which was the reason behind the non-availability of the vaccine to the poorer section of Indian society long after its invention. Even after Louis Pasteur contributed to the discovery of the vaccine in the 1880s, the epidemic continued in India till the end of that century, since the vaccine was available to only the upper class Indians and the British. Due to racial prejudices, the colonial master did not consider the viability of native medicines on the eve of the pandemic, and were quite distrustful of even those Indian practitioners who were serving under the Raj. In the light of such cases of inequality, we can appreciate the anti-establishment nature of Tagore's action during the Spanish epidemic. He took matters into his own hands during the pandemic of 1918 and concocted a medicine called Ponchotica Pachon, which is presented here, that he administered it to the students of Shantiniketan. Whether it be a coincidence or a testimony of Tagore's medical know-how, the pandemic indeed could not affect the people under Tagore's care. The point of Tagore's example here is not a reckless philanthropism with disregard to sensible authoritative guidelines, but the necessity of maintaining social solidarity in times of crisis.
Right. His poem Alter Ego from his collection The Last Septet or Shesh Shoptak portrays the indelible essentiality of communality that challenges the notion that the aspirations of isolation are actually antithetical to the compulsory communality of human identity. Rather, this desire for isolation and immunity from the collective only goes to prove a deeper inseparability of individual selves from each other and within the network of lives. I'm going to read out a few lines from the poem to highlight how Tagore's negative affirmation of the inseparability of self is internalized within a single subjectivity and the discourses of asceticism it utters. Since the beginning, he has been accompanying me, that old man of considerable age, identified with myself. Today I informed him we must separate. He has come down the flow of bloods of millions of ancestors. His thirst, his hunger are age old. A celestial message prevailing from above gets polluted by his turmoil. Whenever with offerings I adorn my plate for worship, he tends his hand to usurp them. He has won my sympathy from moment to moment, the reason for which when death clutches him, I feel worried. I, who am deathless, I shall now keep apart. Let him be outside my door, that old and famished man. Now, we cannot be sure who he exactly means by that old man of considerable age. It might be his body as opposed to his soul that is speaking to us, or it might be death itself, the possibility of which resides within a person since his very birth. In the first stanza, Tagore informs his alter ego that he intends to separate from him. However, the possibility that the existence of his alter ego might come to an end torments him intensely because he has sympathized with him from time to time and therefore regrets the possibility of seeing him in the clutches of death. The speaker is deathless because the soul, according to Tagore, is immortal. He speaks of his body as an ancient, decrepit figure, famished and brought down to begging for morsels that disrupts his worship of higher powers. In this slide, we show how these images of decrepitude may be impressed upon by the onslaught of Spanish flu. So Tagore's sympathies are evoked by this unruly beggar, but he resists the bodily contamination of the heavenly messages that the soul contains. The poet imagines his soul at a safe distance, sitting upstairs, watching his body, inventing, I quote, inventing several antics, portents, and scoffing at the futility of all. However, the note of resentment in the soul's voice denotes that, in spite of the posture of aloofness, it is chained to the body. The soul considers itself free, transparent, eternal, the master of itself. I quote, the flow of joy at the source of creation. But the soul can only make these assertions by negating the very body which writes. Okay. It is significant that the Epidemic Diseases Act that was framed by the British colonizers in 1897 is still the backbone of the basis on which the administration intervenes in times of epidemics in modern India. This act that gives the authority the power to extraordinary measures on the occasion of outbreak of a disease enabled the British officials to prevent the epidemic with a disregard for any kind of personal dignity or cultural sentiments of the Indian subject. Now see, this slide shows this right side image. It shows the recent dousing of the immigrants with sanitizers. Almost in a way, the farmers spread pesticides on crops. The image strikingly mirrors the public bathing of Indian civilization during the 1897 plague. See the image provided on the left. So, public discontent resulting from such treatments had escalated in Pune to such a point that W.C. Rand, the assistant commissioner who was charged with the task of implementing the act, was gunned down by 3 followers of Bal Gangadhar Tilak. Although the act underwent no change following this event, the example of Pune made the Bengal government more careful about the consent of the native patient while enforcing disease preventions. Still, the native Bengalis feel considerably violated by the government's intervention, and while the upper and middle class Bengalis responded with flight or concealment, the poorer section resorted to violent riots.
As noted already, Tagore is well aware of the fact that an epidemic is not just a purely pathological event, but also a social and political event, which makes him observe in Nostonir, I quote, when the plague first broke out in Calcutta, the poor citizens were less afraid of the pandemic than of the preventive staff who wore its badge. Potence. The statement conveys the role of the biased behaviors in aggravating the social divide during the pandemic. Slide 12 portrays the contrast between the badge wielders and the commoners. As opposed to the metonymic embodiedness of disciplinary authority in badges, death resides as an abstraction. Probably the physical nature of authority makes it more intimidating to the public since it is perceivable, as opposed to the abstraction of death. So, during the lockdown, what keeps the general public inside their houses is not the invisible virus in the air, but the solid threat of police beatings. Tagore understands that given that the notion of nationality, hegemony, or sin spread like contamination, they have the same characteristics of ephemerality, and yet they gain power only upon being thus embodied in authoritative bodies. The gesture of embodiment is exclusionary. It creates a physical boundary that marks the inside from the outside, just as the metonymic concreteness of power enables distinguishing the privileged from the poor. On the other hand, agents of death like coronavirus can affect anyone invariable of social class or nationality. We know that the COVID-19 can affect human beings of all class and nation. Even the highest officials of state like Boris Johnson or Jair Bolsonaro. In the poem My Old Servant, Tagore has worked upon this pervasive nature of death that disregards class divide by narrating a case of smallpox epidemic. In this slide, we see a temporary hospital set up during the plague, as opposed to the setting up of such temporary hospitals based on caste and communal identities. During the late 19th century, Tagore insists upon the necessary ground of humanity that is shared by all, and that comes into view only when confronted by death. The commonality of that necessity constitutes the interactive humanitarian community that Tagore proclaims. And this interactive humanist community is, we argue, need of the hour.
The expression epidemic enters into Tagore's lexicon as he extends its usage from a literal case of epidemic to a metaphorical sense, as when he speaks of the epidemic of nationalist sentiments, for instance. This nationalism is a cruel epidemic of evil that is sweeping over the human world of the present age, eating into its moral vitality. Cortex. This anthropomorphic tendency of seeing in a natural phenomenon the image of a man-made phenomenon is visible today. As we note, Facebook captions like stupidity or nepotism is a bigger pandemic than COVID-19. So Tagore's equation of a natural pandemic with artificial factors like nationalism is interesting on 2 points. Firstly, it shows that he does not go for a simple binary that nature is good, civilization is bad. Okay, let me show you a landscape by Tagore where nature is depicted in darker shades, as we see in the novella Rajoshi and the play Bishorjan. Nature too can be violent just like nationalism, which is a human sentiment and can generate a violent chauvinism. Both nature and humanity are capable of being read in tooth and claw, as Lord Alfred Tennyson puts it, and at times we have to be unnatural in order to save lives. It is necessary that we connect with nature, but when times call for it, we shall also have to work against nature in order to be more civil. This readiness to defy the flow of nature makes Tagore a modern poet. In this way, he is more than a romantic, since the romantic aesthetic takes nature as a model of behavior. Although in romantic literature as well, we see the awareness of the fact that nature is not always benevolent or morally right, for that matter. Be it P.B. Shelley's Mont Blanc, The Rime of the Ancient Mariner by Samuel Taylor Coleridge, etc. Even some of the more simplistic versions of today's eco-criticism can be seen to fall for this moral binary of nature good, man bad. Secondly, by calling nationalism an epidemic, Tagore is advocating a transnational attitude that is required especially today. Recently, we have seen a manifestation of American exclusivism when the President Donald Trump tried to buy the entire stock of a vaccine for corona from the German medical company Die Welt. Such selfishness, which Trump would justify in the name of nationalism, is precisely what will do much, since as long as any country remains affected by the COVID-19 virus, none of the other countries are safe. Let us now take a look at how the more marginalized section of the Indian population managed to help each other even with fewer resources. This slide has deeply affected me. Just see how the woman is being carried with a single bamboo. In his novel Rajoshi, the priest Billon had started to live in Nijamatpur, Noakhali, where an epidemic had broken out. The priest starts looking after the patients irrespective of their religion and buried or burned the dead as per their religious affiliation. See, this is Tagore. This generous and thoughtful action during an epidemic or a crisis is what makes the figure of Billon an inspiration for the protagonist King Govindamanika and also to all of us, of course. Tagore's writing help us deal with the fear of death. Here is a very relevant quotation by him. He calls out to us to bring out the best in ourselves even at this hour of global crisis, especially because of this crisis. At the current pandemic situation, we hear the voice of the poet cry, I quote, across the difficult path in a dizzying speed on most audacious missions, what if harsh days make us suffer? We want no truce. We shall want no consolation. Quotations.
In the poem Dauntless that appeared in his 1928 collection Mohua, Tagore advocates the lovers to be fearless and reluctant to beg favors from fate. That is the quotation. At the time of peril, love here connotes an ontological collectiveness within which the individual's singularity gains sovereignty, not at the cost of the other's sovereignty. Rather, it is a relation within which, in asserting oneself in the face of death, the self simultaneously asserts the others' existence. I quote from the poem: "If our oars break at all while crossing the river, if the cords of our sail are torn, standing face to face with death, we shall know you are and I am. With both our eyes, we have seen the world. We have seen one another. We both have endured the scorching desert path. We have run after no seductive mirage. We have not deceived our mind by falsifying truth. With this pride, we shall cover the globe as long as we both live. Let these words be magnanimous, O beloved. You are and I am.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So, thank you, Ananda Chatterjee and Nisarga Bhattacharjee. Am I audible? Am I
Yes,
audible?
yes.
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
thank you. You have presented a wonderful paper indeed, focusing on Taylor's take on epidemics and pandemics in a number of his masterpieces. I must say it was a very well-researched paper. You have connected Taylor's ideas of death with his personal encounter with different epidemic and pandemics, both at home and abroad. I would like to request Sudipto Roy to run the question session.
Okay.
Over to Sudipto.
Thank you, Shamimda. Thank you, Nisarga Bhattacharjee and Ananda Chatterjee, for your wonderful lecture and presentation. We have some questions. I'll be picking some. Here is Devanjan Mitro. He is asking, Devanjan Mitro from Mrinalini Datta Mahavidyalaya. He is an assistant professor. He is asking you to: Indian philosophy deeply interconnects the notions of death and life as cyclical. Do you think this philosophical stand also influences Tagore?
Yeah, of course it does. We all know, the Upanishad was very influential for Tagore. Must give you one example, that is in the poem Admonition. We have given the image of the maturing fruit, the fruit that matures, and this image is actually taken from the disciples of Ganesha, who compared themselves with a fruit. Uh, it's like their ego, as their ego matures, it becomes a fruit. And at the point when the ego is most mature, it falls from the tree. And at that point, they become egoless. Now, the interesting thing is that this very same image is also used by Heidegger in his Being and Time. And Tagore here takes the same image. So, in this manner, there is a continuity with Indian philosophy and existentialism and also Tagore.
Thank you, Nisarga, for your answer. I think that will obviously satisfy Devanjan Mitro. We have another question from Swapna Roy. She is in our department. Instant within quotes is ecstatic hyphenated and within quotes, rather than within parentheses in static linked as it is to other adjacent configurational frames of relations. What do you think about time as within quotes flow in context to the pandemic?
Yeah, right. Aesthetic as in standing outside. Already in Shah Jahan, I have quoted, he speaks of the majesty that is not in time, but majesty that seduces time and is actually outside of time. So yeah, death, the moment of death or the moment immediately preceding death is the moment when we feel like being outside of time, and that inside of the, let's say, fourth dimension further enhances our idea of life as such. So yeah, of course, Tagore is here questioning the continuity, the linear continuity of time.
Thank you, Nisarga. Thank you for the answer. We don't see any other questions, no more questions. So I think, Shamimda, I think over to you. I think we should call it a day.
Yes, we should call it a day. Thank you, and I want to see all the participants again tomorrow. We'll start sharp at 11 once again, just like today. We had certain technical glitch at the very beginning of this beginning of the program, and I seek for apology for that on behalf of the organizers of this webinar. So thank you very much, all the participants, and thank you very much, all the speakers here. And we have Ananda Chatterjee and Shakuntala as our last speakers. So I thank them especially for being with us and for being so much patient, because I understand that there has been, of course, a long span of time. Okay, we spent at the very beginning. Anyway, thank you, all of you. Thank you, all the participants. I want you see all the participants tomorrow once again. Thank you. We call it a day.
Thank you.